Astonishing Legends would like to thank Babbel, Squarespace, Stamps.com, Cerebral, Peloton, Theragun, our contributors at Patreon.com, and you, our listeners, for making tonight's show possible.
25 years ago, on February 22nd, 1997, Art Bell, the host of the most famous paranormal radio show in history, Coast to Coast AM, called a man who had sent him a strange fax. That fax read as follows. Dear Art, I'm writing to you to see if I can get some help from you or your vast listening audience. I live in rural eastern Washington near the Monastash Ridge. On our property, there is a hole. Like the previous owners and the owners before them, we've been throwing our trash into the hole. Apparently, the hole has been there for as long as anyone can remember. At first, I thought it was an ancient well. The hole is 9 feet 9 inches in diameter. There is a stone retaining wall around it, and we put a steel door on top to keep anyone from falling into it. As I said earlier, people have been throwing their trash into the well for decades. Furniture, household trash, dead cows, building debris, you name it. The thing is, I noticed the hole never filled up, so I got curious, actually obsessed, and began trying to measure the depth of the hole. I emptied 3 fishing reels of about 1,500 yards of monofilament trying to determine the depth. Soon I was buying fishing line in bulk. So far, I've sunk about 80,000 feet of line into the hole without reaching bottom. My wife works at a local university with a geology department, and we hope to get some professional scholarly help in determining the depth of the hole. As far as I can tell, there's nothing else particularly strange about it except for 2 other things. Dogs refuse to get within 100 feet of the hole, and birds won't sit on the retaining wall or metal door. Another strange thing is there's no echo when you yell into the hole. Indeed, I've never heard anything hit the bottom when tossed in. We once tossed in an old refrigerator and we never heard it hit the bottom. No crash, splash, or crunch. I hope your listeners can help with possible explanations. I'm wondering if this, based on my measurements so far, might be the deepest hole on Earth. Signed, Mel Waters. Art managed to get Mel on the phone, and the continuing series of conversations have definitely passed the bar for an astonishing legend. In 2011, 14 years after Art first spoke with Mel, Scott and I were having discussions about starting a podcast. I was working full-time in my former career, and Scott was furiously busy being a stay-at-home dad for his then 3-year-old son. But we knew we wanted to do this podcast, even though it didn't even have a name yet. So we had started what we used to refer to frequently, the story folder. It lived on Scott's computer, and we constantly added to it. We still have it, and it has well over 1,000 potential story ideas now. The story of Mel's hole was added to that folder 11 years ago, 3 years before we released episode number 1 of Astonishing Legends. It's one of the ideas that were a part of what made us want to do what we're doing. And tonight, we're finally covering this long-dormant legend. A legend that originated on the radio show that made it possible for us and all paranormal podcasts to find an audience, Coast to Coast AM. The questions we had then, and still have now, was this bottomless pit real? And if so, what became of it? And what became of Mel Waters?
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
I would be very cautious, Mel, about accepting a generous offer for the property with the hole, because you know what? No matter what else, Mel, your hole is worth millions of dollars. Art Bell, creator and original host of Coast to Coast AM.
Join us tonight for part 1 of our 2-part special series on the bottomless pit Coast to Coast AM made famous in the late 1990s, Mel's Hole.
And we're back!
All right, are you falling into Mel's Hole?
Yeah, I thought, well...
All right, it was a couple things. First of all, we already did a falling and we're back for Hoska or Hauska.
Nobody remembers that.
And on top of that, there's no echoes inside Mill's hole.
I know. I was taking a little creative license too, and
Okay.
also giving Sarah a little bit of fun to put some effects and filters on it.
Because that's what she wants after getting
of
our
course.
dailies anyway.
Also, I'm very tired of saying it. We're back. So
Oh, no.
no, I just want to freshen it up and give it some pizzazz. But this story requires no pizzazz because, man, the further you go down the hole, it's not even a rabbit hole.
No.
Well, rabbits would disappear in this thing.
They wouldn't come back.
It gets weirder and weirder.
Yes, it does. All right, folks. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about a legend that started on Art Bell's infamous radio show, Coast to Coast AM. But first, a couple of very quick program notes. We wanted to give a proper shout out to one of our recent guests on our exclusive Patreon show called The Astonishing Junk Drawer. His name is Bob Anderson.
Yeah, Bob is a fascinating guy, and we're lucky to consider him a new friend and fellow podcaster here. And we had an outstanding interview with him where he talked about actually seeing the Chicago Mothman in person. How many people you know can say that, right?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
He was close enough to make out the texture of the skin on its wings. And on top of that, several other people had pulled off the highway over a quarry and were looking at it with him. Now, he has his own podcast, by the way, and it's excellent. It's called Bob After Dark. So look for that wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Bob's story was great and just another good one in a growing series of guest interviews on the Astonishing Junk Drawer. So if you want to hear those, head over to patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where you can listen to those as well as other bonus content, including commercial-free versions of the main show here.
You're not going to mention the other thing.
What other thing?
Well, we did the last one live with video.
Oh, that's right, folks. We actually did the most recent episode of the Junk Drawer live, and I feel pretty sure that will be happening more and more. Also, by the way, patrons, I apologize. I didn't post the audio version only of that to the Patreon RSS feed yet. I am going to get that done. So sorry, but you can go to Patreon directly and watch the video there. It's up there, the live video, although, of course, now it's on tape. Digital tape. They don't say tape anymore, do they? So it's another reason to check out our Patreon page. Video of our junk drawer.
Sounds like something you could get arrested for in some states. And lastly, folks, we never have to do this more than once a year, it seems. But here's the deal. Our fantastic editor, Sarah, is running out of segues again. So you know what that means. We need you to send in bits where you get to hear yourselves after a commercial block. You know what those are, right? You get to hear bits of yourself announcing segues of the show after a commercial block. And isn't that fun? You get to be heard by tens of people, maybe even hundreds. Maybe even hundreds of people will hear that. But look, we enjoy hearing you. We find them really funny and charming, and I personally love to hear that when I'm listening back to the show, if I ever do listen. But yeah.
Well, yeah, it's my favorite part of QCing the show right before it gets posted because it's the only part I haven't already heard. So it's really nice to hear.
And I've been pleasantly surprised by some people we know through the show and friends of the show and Legenders, Loungers, and all these folks that we will interact with. And it's like, there they are.
There they are.
Because some people we only know via text or the written word. So it's fun to hear them. Anyway, we need more of those.
Yes, we do.
It's not hard to do. You're going to have a lot of fun, and you'll have even more fun hearing your own self.
Yeah, so the easiest way to do that is to hit our main webpage, astonishinglegends.com, and right there at the top, click on where it says Submit a Listener Segue. It'll take you right into the directions. It's a piece of cake, but get some in soon, because if you don't, Sarah's going to fire us.
Oh, yeah, we don't want that. All right, so let's fall deep down into tonight's show.
So Art Bell sadly passed away in 2018, but not before launching another show called Midnight in the Desert, which a lot of people will be familiar with. Coast to Coast, however, continues to this day with regular host George Norrie and then several regular guest hosts filling in, including a former guest of our own show from January this year, journalist George Knapp.
Yeah, also Connie Willis, who's, when she's hosted, has turned us on to several stories, one of them being Flight 19.
That's right. And so it's pretty cool. It's still rolling. It's got a long legacy, and Art Bell will live forever in our hearts and minds. It's been a lot of fun revisiting Art for this episode because this is the first time in the history of Astonishing Legends we've covered a legend that actually started on Coast to Coast. That's its inception point. In terms of public knowledge, I mean, there was a small group of locals that would have known about this thing, according to the story, if you believe any of this at all. But in terms of it becoming in a part of the paranormal zeitgeist, if you will, it started with Coast to Coast.
For once, a form of urban legend did not start with a creepypasta story. So
Yes.
you folks out there, it did not start on the internet with creepypasta. It started with an unknown, mysterious, ancient technology called a facsimile machine.
Yeah.
This is classic Coast to Coast AM fare. This is a story that Art Bell himself, he loved. He said he loved this story. That's why he got so involved and invested with it and kept it going for several years. And it always makes an appearance on the Best of Art Bell. So whenever they have a collection of shows, this is one of the stories that is usually included. And if you love Art Bell and Coast to Coast, you'll know this story, but you may not know all the details because there are several interviews that took place with the gentleman at the center of the story, Mel Waters, and they're a little bit hard to cull together. You can find them on the internet. You can also be a Coast Insider and get them in the archives, but really it took us a little bit to suss out what was said when, the dates, and the timeline on this. So if you piece it all together, you can make a narrative, but we're going to help with that. I also wanted to say, though, is not only this story, classic Coast to Coast AM, Art Bell, it's also classic Astonishing Legends. In that, as we said in the cold open, this is one of the premier and original stories that Scott and I would love to sit down with over an old-fashioned and just talk the heck out of it. Just go over theories and like, hey, did you hear about this? And what about this part with the magic beam? Oh yeah, what about the dogs coming back to life? These elements are exactly what we love to discuss, and we're part of the genesis for this podcast in that we would love to have a way to talk about this with not just us, but a bunch of people, and hence we have a podcast. So when you listen to this story, just know that this is back to the roots, original OG Astonishing Legends.
Yes, it is. It was an inspiration for the show years before the show even started, because it took us years to get it off the ground.
That's true.
The other thing it reminded me of was just how smart, inquisitive, and funny Art was.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the stuff that he said over the years that Mel Waters came on his show cracked me up, including another one that was a close runner-up for me for the opening quote. This is an Art line right here. Mel's the guy with the never-ending hole. I mean, we could call it a bottomless pit, but it was always a hole. It was the never-ending hole. Mel's hole is worth millions of dollars. It's just, I know that Art knew what he was doing when he was doing that. So,
well, you know what's interesting is that a pit, to me, implies a bottom. And that's the crux of the story here. Is there a bottom to this thing? So when you say hole, you know what? I was reminded of this when we started talking about Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. You have these blocks, and some are called blind holes, right?
Yes.
Meaning they don't go all the way through. They're drilled for a reason, and maybe they fit a peg or a peg fits into them. There's a reason they didn't go all the way through to the other side. They certainly could have with their technology, but they didn't. So it had a purpose to it. So anyway, that's a blind hole. But in this case, it's not a well. As far as we know, there's no water in it. And it was never dug for that purpose, perhaps. But it's a hole. But where does it go to? Does it pop out on the other side of the earth? We will find out.
Yeah, and there's another part of this, and I just want to go ahead and get this out of the way up front for us because I don't want to risk any spoilers. I don't want to bring this up at the moments that would make them spoilers. But there is a clear connection between this story and the root idea behind Outer Range.
We've both seen the entire series by now to the end, hopefully, of season 1. And we're desperately hoping for a season 2 because there are just so many questions that are just left
dangling. It's a good show. It's a good show, by the way.
It's thoroughly enjoyable, but there's some weirdness. And the more I got into this story and was reminded of it, the more I am convinced that this story here of Mel's Hole was part of at least the inspiration for Outer Range.
Yeah, I would agree.
We'll leave that up to your imaginations, and some people will say that this was all left up to Mel's imagination, but we'll see. Are there aspects of this story that can be nailed down? And this is like any great, you can call it an urban legend, a media mystery of sorts, or a legend tripping type of thing where you never get to the bottom of it, literally. But we'll see. How much of this are you willing to believe? But what I liked about it is that It starts off fairly innocuously, and it ends up, let's just say you get your money's worth when it comes to weirdness. All right, now are we ready to find out what this hole's all about, and who is this Mel Waters character?
Yeah, let's figure it out. It's funny, I have to stop my mind from saying Mel Fisher, the treasure hunter, every time I think about Mel Waters. But yes, Mel Waters. So if I trip up, you can send the emails to Forrest.
Yes, I will just, I'll forward them back to Scott. So the idea here is, as we go to describe this story and Mel and the hole, keep these elements in mind because you will have to make a judgment on whether you believe any of this at all. But before we start, here's something I wanted to say about Art Bell himself. He's much beloved for all of us who love this genre and strange stories and even the stuff that dipped into weird health kind of things. And this story does too a little bit. I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything that encompasses the things that we like to talk about that you will probably hear on Coast to Coast AM. People look back fondly on Art Bell as being the maestro, the ringmaster of all this weirdness. And they will often say, well, what do you like about Art Bell? And they'll say, Art, he challenged his guests. He just didn't believe everybody that came on the show outright, right? He really challenged them and he wanted to get to the bottom of this. And that's why we loved Art, is that he was pretty skeptical and stuff. And I would say, yes, but not always. Because to love this stuff, you don't outright reject it. You want to hear the story. You want to go where it's going to take you. And so to do that, you don't just rebut everything as it comes through the door. You seek stuff out and then you make your judgment later. Like, what are the facts here? What do I believe? That was the charm of Art, in that he was accepting without shutting the door and everything and then slowly opening it to see what was behind it. You know what I'm saying? He opened the door, like, let's find out what's here about this story. And the most important part of it was that he loved the entertainment value. He was here to entertain us. It's like what we do on our show. We're infotainment in a way, in that we hope to deliver some decent information, but ultimately we're here to all be entertained. And that was the purpose of Art. So when you look back on it, I know we all like to be nostalgic, but just keep that in mind as you hear this, and you get a picture not only of Mel, but of Art Bell himself. So that's why I love this story as well. So this saga starts off, you could say, on February 21st, 1997, when a man calling himself Mel Waters, stating he was from the Ellensburg, Washington area in central Washington state, he apparently sent a fax in earlier in the day to the Coast to Coast show. And for those of you who, I can't believe if you don't know it, but what it is, there was an old-timey machine, and you would stick a piece of paper in, and through the telephonic wires, it would come out the other end to another fax machine and basically just print it out.
Yes.
The earlier models would be like the teletype, and that was just a telephonic signal where you would type in a message and it goes to another gigantic 300-pound typewriter on the other end, and it would just type out that message for you, which was pretty cool to see back in the old days when you didn't have that. So for those of you who don't know, and what that did was just basically scan the image on one end and just recreate it on another end. So you could fax in your questions or story ideas to the show via fax. And a lot of people did that. And that's what this person, Mel Waters, did with this plea for help that we read in the cold open. And this fax is what piqued Art's curiosity when he read
That's
this.
right.
Like, well, what are we talking about here? Well, it's a mysterious hole on this gentleman, Mel Waters' property, about 9 feet, 9 inches in diameter, or for our European listeners, 2.97 meters in diameter, located about 9 miles west of Ellensburg, Washington, and on or near the Banashtash Ridge in Kittitas County. Knowing the region and the state somewhat well, it's more so centrally located. If you've ever taken a car ride or a bus coming from the east and heading towards Seattle, you get on I-90 and you will pass through Ellensburg. If you take the Greyhound bus, you stop off a little bit before that in George, Washington. Get it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
because
clever.
it is.
Is this back when you were a drug mule?
No, I would say back in the day when you didn't have your own means, Greyhound was a way to get across the state in a leisurely manner. And the bus driver would stop off in George, Washington at this cafe called, guess what? The Martha Inn.
Oh, okay.
See, George and Martha Washington.
Yeah,
Well, of course,
okay.
now it's a huge and popular, there's a big music venue there. And a lot of people, the Gorge, a lot of people go there for a great concert, and they've had actually a lot of big names play there. George Washington is a little east of Ellensburg, but you will pass through Ellensburg on the way. And it is also home of Central Washington University. There are 3 universities like that. Of course, you have your Eastern Washington University in Cheney. That's a little town south of Spokane. And then you have Western Washington University. And we've talked about CWU, Central Washington. I don't know if you remember, Scott, but they have a great primate lab there. And that is at one time the home of Coco, the sign language ape.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting that you bring up Coco just
Yeah.
in terms of animals and science, because the day that Art called Mel Waters after getting that fax was also the day that they announced success with Dolly the sheep. Same day.
Oh, interesting.
The cloned sheep.
Yeah, you know what? I believe
Same day.
Mel talks about that with Art.
Does he? I don't remember him talking about that. They did talk about some other current events, but I don't remember them talking about Dolly.
Right, not so much about the sheep. Art does bring up cloning, and basically,
Yes.
don't jump ahead, but we're gonna talk about what the government, what you think
Yes.
the government is willing and capable of doing, and it came up about cloning, and Art's like, well, that's a bunch of baloney. Of course, they're gonna clone people. They're gonna tell you they don't or would never, but if they can do it, someone's gonna do it.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, you're gonna have some Dr. Evil type doing it, and you better know what's coming, or you better do it yourself. So that's how governments react to stuff, and that includes psyops, which is maybe tied to this. We'll see. Art gave a lot of time to Mel Waters. How many hours would you say, Scott, are there of interview with Mel?
Well, his first appearance was around 40 minutes. That's the first time that he spoke to him. Then he had him back a few days later for, I think, an hour and 10 minutes. Then there was another appearance for an hour and 10 minutes a few years later, a few years after that, another hour 20. And after that, 2 hours, 40 minutes, I think. Like, it's all told, it's like 5 or 6 hours over the stretch of several years, which tells you a little bit about how Art felt about this story, like you've already said. But he clearly was interested in this, regardless of what he thought about it. It was good radio.
Of course, people call in, and one of the other charms of this show is that they would always take callers like, west of the Rockies, or calling the first-time caller line, as well. Whatever. There's a lot of charming things about the show that...
Well, he had different lines. He had the first-time caller line. He had the wild card, I think it was.
Yep, a lot of people calling in on the wild card line, and that's another great feature of this show. And it's heartwarming to hear these callers from over a decade ago calling into the show with their questions and comments. And of course, some people don't believe him. They don't believe this guest and a lot of guests that he would have on the show, but that didn't bother Art. Look, it's entertainment. Why you get to shut somebody out just because, oh, that sounds silly? Well, this is all silly. That's my premise for what we cover. It's all impossible and ridiculous, and there are people who aren't going to believe any of it, but it creates and sparks wonder. So in this case, though, people were calling in, and Art wants to let you know that he chose this story. This guy didn't force his way on the show. He's not just calling in as a cold call, first-time caller. Art heard the specs of the story and thought it was interesting enough to want to interview Mel. So it starts off as a very longish segment for the Coast to Coast AM radio show. Usually, sometimes people will get an hour, sometimes just a short blurb, depending on how many people they got lined up for that night. But there's another factor why Art was interested in that. There are some possibly paranormal properties, of course, about this hole and the land around it, possibly. It may have been seized by the federal government once they found out about it. How do they find out about it? Possibly from the Coast to Coast AM show. Maybe somebody's listening. So I'm just going to hit some highlights here just to whet your appetites. Well, listen to this. Possibly seized by the U.S. government. And some of the attributes of the hole, well, Mel Waters, now he didn't claim this himself. He said there were other neighbors who knew about this hole, and everybody, for as long as he could remember, were throwing junk down the hole, as we said in the cold open, right? Building materials, dead farm animals like cows, refrigerators. At one point, Mel threw one down there. Television tubes were another thing that Mel liked to throw down there because they make a good, satisfying pop, for the tube when it smashes. And they had been on the property for about 4 years, Mel and his wife.
Yeah.
people had owned that property before them for about, I think the previous owner, he said, was quite elderly, and he'd owned it for about 40 years.
Yes.
And for all that time, for decades then, generations have been throwing crap down this hole.
Yeah.
And he said, it should fill up by now, right? I mean, how deep is this thing? And Mel never said this, but one of the stories that he does tell Art about, because he's asking him, like, well, anything weird happened with this? And it's like, what else? Well, he said, yeah, there is one story that Mel had heard. And again, this is not Mel's story. He's saying this is probably apocryphal. Is that there's a story of a neighbor who was a hunter, and he had a hunting dog. And when the dog died, as rather than bury him, he placed him in the hole. And the story goes, a little while later, the hunter and other people, apparently, depending on who he had talked to, saw this dog alive again. Same collar, same metal tag, same coloring, just running through the woods, sometimes in town. But the dog would not come back to the hunter. So, okay, you got a pet cemetery angle on this thing.
Yeah, well, there was also a story that it looked like the dog was hunting with another person.
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah.
But he knew it was his dog. He knew it was his dog. It was the same color and the same tag.
So you could say, like, well, they just mistook it for another dog. But it's a small community there. Everybody knows each other, and you don't get a lot of outsiders. So if you want to believe that angle, that's one paranormal story. Another one is that this is also told to Mel by another neighbor one time at night. He was there by the hole, and he saw a black beam, blacker than black, emanating from the hole and into the night sky, blotting out everything around it. Just this black beam. And it wasn't just that neighbor. Apparently, as Mel will tell it, other neighbors have claimed to have seen that. But Mel himself did not. He's just saying, look, this is some of the weird stories I've heard about this thing. But for me, really the weirdness is that I just can't find the bottom. And it sounds pretty mundane. And then, years after Mel has his interactions with the hole and kind of leaves that story for a bit, other people, of course, heard this broadcast and went looking for it with their own obsessions about it. And some of the other crazy things about this hole is that people who went to see it and research it for themselves, legend trippers and paranormal investigators, there are claims that if you took a radio, portable radio, and you went near the hole, you could hear radio broadcasts and music from the past. So it's a hole-in-the-ground chronovisor.
No one knows what the chronovisor is.
Well, give us a little explanation then.
Oh, well, it was supposedly these glasses that let you look into time in the past and the future, I think, right?
Yes, different time periods.
Yeah.
If you all remember the Nazi bell, there is a claim that when that thing was up and whirring and purring, above it people could see images of past events. Yeah, different time periods. It created a time vortex. That's what's happening here a little bit. Another claim is that it has alchemical properties, and that people said if you take metals near the hole, they would change into other metal and different substances. Just table that for the moment. It's a weird hole, okay?
Okay, so just to be clear, Mel's hole is weird.
Mel's hole is weird.
Okay, I just wanted to make that
privately,
clear.
all you folks out there, get your hole jokes.
There's going to be a lot of them. I'm going to have a hard time resisting them, so...
We will endeavor to be adult about this.
You can, yeah.
What was the last one? Oh, yes, Lake Titicaca. Okay, we got through that pretty well. I have the utmost confidence we'll be fine with this one.
We are going to bring the whole story.
You still got to be careful out there, but travel restrictions are easing, so people are really itching to get back out and see the world, and that means fabulous foreign vacations. I just had a group of friends come back from Italy, and it was a dream trip for them.
And what makes it special besides the sights is connection again with people outside of our bubbles.
What's that? No, I'm kidding. Okay, well, that's a lot of the fun of visiting other places is connecting with the people, and I'll tell you, nothing makes a more instant connection and a friendly welcome than being able to speak a little of their language. So often when people see you making an effort to speak with them in their native tongue, they're really appreciative, and they'll go out of their way to tell you about the best restaurants, their favorite spots, and also importantly, what to avoid.
And that's where Babbel, the language learning app that sold more than 10 million subscriptions, comes in. Whether you're traveling abroad, relatives from the old country are coming to visit, or you're just bored with the games on your phone, Babbel teaches you bite-sized language lessons that you can actually use in the real world.
You'll find that Babbel's a really fun and addictive way to finally start learning that language you've always promised yourself you'd learn. While other language apps use AI to design their lesson plans, Babbel's lessons were created by over 100 language experts, and their teaching method has been scientifically proven to be effective.
And they're only 15-minute lessons you can learn on the go. But here's the major advantage I find with Babbel. Their speech recognition technology helps you to improve your pronunciation and accent.
Ooh, that'll be super helpful for you when you get to Rennes-le-Château.
Are you saying my southern accent is poking through my français?
Au contraire, mon frère.
Ooh, nice. You better work on that accent too.
Yeah, I know, it's not great.
Well, there are so many ways to learn with Babbel. In addition to lessons, you can access podcasts, games, videos, stories, and even live classes. Plus, it comes with a 20-day money-back guarantee.
Start your new language learning journey today with Babbel.
Right now, save up to 60% off your subscription when you go to babbel.com/legends.
That's Babbel, BABBEL.com/legends for up to 60% off your subscription.
Babbel, language for life.
Hey man, I don't know if I told you, but I've got a side business going making custom birdhouses that look like little Victorian haunted houses, and I'm selling them online.
What?
Yeah.
No way, dude. No, there's no way you're doing that, and I didn't know about it. What do they look? How big are they? Where can I find them?
All right. Well, I got one social media profile if you want to see pictures and video, and another SM profile if you want to see reviews and what customers have been discussing, and then one where you can DM me with custom requests. And then I have a store profile on a shopping site where you can buy them.
Wait, dude. I think I'm gonna have to stop you right there. I don't think I'm gonna do all that.
Exactly. That is exactly my point. These days, you got exactly one chance, or not even half a chance, of getting people to check out what you got going on, okay? Don't make them do a bunch of work or steps to get there that they're not going to remember. Because you know what? I'll let you in on a little secret. Nobody's really interested in what you got going on.
Ouch.
You've got to trick them into being interested. So that first step has got to be the easiest thing for them to do. So you can set that hook.
That's true. I mean, we've been trying to trick people into listening to a paranormal podcast for years now. You are actually making sense. Well, and of course, as a creator, you can get all that in one place with a Squarespace website. And then your customers or followers can get all that in one easy to remember place too.
Yep, no one's going to remember your long linky URL, your / handle. You got a much better chance with something custom that is totes unique and totes you, like birdhouseburgess.com or whatever fits your brand. Own your own domain name.
That is actually a website name I will not forget, no matter how hard I try. Okay, so you got your audience or your customer there. Now what? That's where Squarespace's elegant features and robust tools take over to seal the deal. If selling is your bag, Squarespace has tools to get you earning fat stacks quickly, like e-commerce templates, inventory management, a simple checkout process, and secure payments. Whatever you sell, Squarespace has merchandising features to make your products look their best online.
Yeah, and stop wasting your time posting offerings separately to every darn place you're online. With simultaneous posting on Squarespace, it can authenticate with your social profiles, letting you auto-post your content to Twitter, Facebook, or Tumblr. And vice versa, you can display posts from your social profiles on your website.
Yeah, if you're selling your time or talents, Squarespace makes it easy with online booking and scheduling for your classes or sessions to your website. Clients can easily see your availability or reschedule if needed, taking the hassle out of coordinating calendars.
It's high time you got your ship together.
Whoa, we can't say that.
I said ship, and by that I mean get everything you've got going on in one easy to remember, easy to sell place with Squarespace.
Head on over to squarespace.com/legends for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code LEGENDS to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You're not actually selling custom birdhouses, right?
No. But I'd absolutely have a Squarespace website for it if I did.
I'm not going to lie, I'm a little disappointed. I'm just going to go to Birdhouse Burgess here real quick.
Forrest and Scott, thank you for supporting their sponsors. I'm Renee. Now, back to the show.
Well, just to kind of round out the tantalizing aspects of the whole here, the story goes on in that there's some dark spots to it. Nobody seems to know a real Mel Waters. So as the narrative continues, and Mel is a part of this and keeps popping up here and there, people start to wonder, who is this guy? Did he ever really exist? Well, obviously there's a recording of him, right? But who is, quote unquote, Mel Waters? There's a question about that. It's all cloaked in mystery, as well as the hole. Where is the hole? Can anybody find it again? Well, people have claimed to right after the story aired. Now, here's the thing. After that story aired on Coast to Coast, it got a lot of imagination sparked. People went looking for it. There were local news reports. newspaper reporters were trying to find out who's this Mel Waters guy? Where is this hole? He kind of describes it as being on the outskirts of Ellensburg near Menashtash Ridge, but it's a large area. Where exactly is this? And where can we find this property? And some people have claimed to have found it, but they never told anybody else where it is exactly. So it's a hole with a mystery, and everyone surrounding this mystery is also a mystery. And you could say, like, well, look, it's just a crank call. It's a hoax. See, people do that all the time, and they fool Art, or they fool George Norrie or any of the other hosts with their crazy stories. But this one is different in that if it is a hoax, there are enough seemingly real elements to keep it going, to keep it believable. And it gets nuts, but not all at once. That, to me, is a sign of a hoax right off the bat. It's just immediately too much. To me, this thing unfolded in a way that I think if it was a hoax, it was expertly done.
Okay, so yeah, let's set the stage to when this first phone call came in, or I should say, and I think that's a mistake to say that, or to when Art first reached out to Mel, because Art was getting faxes all the time. 1 billion people are faxing his show, and this is one that he plucked out and decided to look into, as opposed to a wild card call coming in, or a call coming in on one of his lines. It's like, hey, this happened, I'm in an airplane over Area 51. So
that was another great show, which
famous episode.
He faxes this over, and I think he maybe is just thinking Art's going to announce it on the show, like anybody who wants to call in with some theories or what Mel should do about this hole, geologists or karst experts, anybody have some recommendations to check this out, because he was just curious. He was just like, I don't know what to do with this thing. I want to explore it more in a safe way. What should I do? And Art was interested enough that he got the phone number off the top of the fax. Again, to explain this, if you've never seen a fax, if you turn on the settings on your fax machine, you could have a fax number, of course, print out at the very top in the header or the footer of what your number was, not only your fax number, but also a telephone number if people want to call you about, like, hey, what is this? You just faxed me. So he got that phone number for Mel off that header or footer, off the paper fax that came through, and he called him.
Yes.
Now, you could say, like, it's a good way to bait him. Maybe he just didn't give him a number, but well, there is a number here. If Art's interested, he will call me at this number. So that's how it started up, and Art called Mel.
Yeah, and so this would have been February 21st, 1997. Again, the same day because I always like to look these things up. Dolly the sheep's existence was announced. Not that she was born. It was just that when they said, hey, we cloned a sheep in Scotland. And just because the page that told me about Dolly the sheep had some other good facts on it for what was going on this day, I wanted to let everyone know that the number one song in the United States was the Spice Girls' Wannabe. Wannabe my lover. Okay, and then I'm a horrible, horrible singer. Number one song in Britain, Don't Speak, no doubt. Those of us of a certain age, that'll bring back some memories.
That seems flipped. I would think the Spice Girls would have the number one show in Europe being European, and no doubt.
Yeah, maybe that you think that maybe they got that backwards. Here. I don't know. That was big here. So
well, they both were big songs. Yeah.
You know what? You're right. This is, and what kind of astonishing legend host would I be if I didn't fact check it? You're making a very good point here. So I decided to look at the actual Billboard website for the Billboard Hot 100 for February 21st or 22nd also of 1997. Number one, Wannabe, Spice Girls. So I guess it's right.
Oh, okay,
so,
then.
My hat's off to onthisday.com. They do have it right, even though it looks backwards.
But for those of you who keep track of the archives, the guest the next night would be author Dean Koontz. Another big hit from the late 90s. So the recording that I listened to and took notes from, we'll have a link to that. That is on a compilation archival website for the saga of Mel's Hole. They have a clip that is a compilation of everything. And where they got that, though, was from the Best of Art Bell. And that is a rebroadcast, a compilation of all of Mel's interviews, at least the first 3. And to be clear, those are from February of 1997 when they first started. So that first show, yes, the next night's guest would be Dean Koontz, the author.
Yeah, so technically, because the show runs so late, it was the 21st and the 22nd. Starts on the 21st, finishes on the 22nd. That's when this was happening. And yes, the Spice Girls were at the top of the charts in the United States, and no doubt was at the top of the charts across the pond. So Art calls Mel, and says, hey, I got this fax from you. What is going on? And starts to get the story from Mel. And what's interesting is Mel is talking about life in Ellensburg, Washington, where this story is supposedly taking place. So this episode, this series, folks, is a big, if you believe any of this at all. That phrase was never more apropos than it is for this particular story. We'll be looking along the way at the other details that Mel Waters offers in his story.
Right.
Now, if you want to hear the original one, you got to join the Coast to Coast Insider. You can get over there. It's real affordable. I think the monthly fee right now is $6.95 a month or whatever. You can get into the back end there and listen to these old shows like this one, which is really cool. Some of these Mel Waters shows are available on YouTube in different segments and places because a lot of people are fascinated with this story. But we would encourage you to support Coast to Coast.
Yes.
That's where we listened to them and took our notes from them. So one of the things that happens with Mel, he's calling in. He's like, yeah, you know what? We've just had a huge blizzard. This particular piece of property didn't have power. It didn't have water. It didn't have telephone, anything. And they had some buildings on it, but they had collapsed because of this snowstorm. But the property itself, that's where the hole is. And there's a couple of varying facts about who owns it. But one of the things that Forrest already indicated was that they had it, him and his wife, who were already, I think, in the process of becoming estranged or separating, had it about 4 years. But the property had prior belonged to an elderly person who had it for 30 or 40 years. Mel thought. And that person obviously knew about the hole that was on the land.
Yes.
And a lot of folks in town did. And now when I say a lot, Mel indicates, I don't know, maybe 20 people at least were coming and being allowed to dump into Mel's hole.
Yeah.
So...
dear.
That's
get your laughs out now. All right.
Yeah, so I'm not.
We're not going to make it through. Okay.
No, we're not going to make it through. So this is in Ellensburg, and Forrest, I take it you're familiar with Ellensburg, Washington.
Well, yeah. I mean, I went to the University of Washington, and that's in Seattle, and of course I have friends there. I'm familiar with Washington State and Northern Idaho, and parts of Western Montana. So the whole area, if you live around there, you usually are.
Right.
Especially if you live in what they call the Inland Empire, which is, as people will see on the map, it's like, well, that's more central Washington, slightly south and central in Washington. And you're correct. But a lot of people consider anything east of the Cascades to be Eastern Washington. So, and it's funny if you tell people like, oh, I'm from the Spokane region, or I'm from Northern Idaho, the Panhandle. Like, oh, it must be really rainy there. No, that you're thinking of Seattle, you're thinking of Tacoma, Olympia, all the western cities there. And yes, it is often rainy and gloomy during the winter. The usual weather pattern is 40 degrees with drizzle.
Yeah, and that would be influenced by the geography of the area, right? Like
you're on the coast, yeah. So Vancouver's the same thing. That's why they shot a lot of the X-Files there, because it was moody and evocative. But what I will say, having gone to the University of Washington for 2 years at least to get my undergraduate stuff out of the way, is that you would be like that during the day, and then as the sun was setting, the clouds would break, the winds would come through, and it would be a beautiful sunset. Yeah. So it just changes a lot. But yes, a lot of people can't put up with that because it is very rainy during the winter. But the springs and summers, gorgeous.
Right.
So if anybody in the Pacific Northwest has gone westward and on I-90, and don't you know of I-90? You must have taken it on your cross-country journeys at some point, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. But I never got up to the Pacific Northwest. I always wanted to, but I haven't quite made it up there.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, if you take a car trip with the family and you head west, you'll go through Ellensburg because it goes right through I-90, and I-90 will touch the bottom edge of the city limits there of the town.
Right.
So you go through there, and then a little while later, you're in the Seattle area if you keep on going. So a lot of people in the area have heard of Ellensburg, but it's a little town. It's a college town.
Right.
As Mel will describe it a little later on, as we'll see, he describes the population back then as about like 12,000 or so, and over half of that is probably college students. So a little less than maybe 6,000 people are local. So it is a tight-knit community, and that figures into this because with that descriptor, you should think that people would know of Mel. And as he describes it, like, yeah, a lot of people were dumping there. He didn't have it fenced off. You could kind of, I think there was a little bit of an access road,
Yeah.
maybe a mile in, then it goes to a dirt road.
Yeah, I think it was a mile and a half from the mouth of the access road to the hole. And
right.
Yeah, a lot of people are showing up. They're throwing refrigerators down. He's doing this too. They're throwing television tubes. They're throwing all kinds of things, and they're never a crash, splash, or crunch, as he says.
Right.
They can't ever hear any noise. And there is even a Mexican gentleman who makes money hauling off used tires in town and in the area, and he brings the truck up there and dumps all those in the hole.
We heard about this later, on a later interview with Mel, that he said, well, I never told you this before, but yeah, we had the diminutive Mexican gentleman whose job was to collect these used tires, and if they were too bald, if he couldn't resell them or retread them, instead of paying a disposal fee, he would just throw them in the hole. He said, like, there must be thousands of tires down there.
Right, so, on top of everything else. Literally on top of everything else.
And as Art said, like, ugh, God, that bottom of that hole, if there is one, has got to be disgusting.
Tires, dead cows.
Stew. Right.
So anyway, a lot of stuff is going into the hole.
Right.
And when Mel is on talking to Art, he confesses to being a little bit concerned about the water table. But the thing is, when he went to measure the depth of the hole, he had a very novel idea. He apparently used to be, he was a self-described former, almost professional shark fisherman.
Yeah, so think of Quint.
Yes, in Jaws.
Right, Robert Shaw. He doesn't do that for a living. He's certainly not that grizzled. Nowadays, at this point, he's pretty much retired, but he's working on a few things. But he has experience with shark fishing, and he has a clever idea, like you said, to find out, one, not only how deep is the hole, but is there water down there?
Yeah. And at the time that this story takes place, we're able to deduce, based on something he said in a later interview, that he was probably around 64 or 65 when this first call takes place. And he decides he's going to get some fishing line and put a 1 pound weight on it, which you would think as a fisherman, you're like, 1 pound, that's crazy, but not for sharks. He's probably got these. So he's taking a 1 pound weight and putting it on the end of a 20 pound test line, monofilament.
Right.
And he's got these big reels, these big saltwater shark reels, and he's lowering the line down and trying to wait for it to go slack.
Right.
It's like when the weight hits the bottom, the line's going to go slack. So he gets his reel, he lowers it down. It's going down 1,500 feet.
With his initial spools, yes.
With his initial spools, and nothing's happening. Right. So he's starting to try to figure out, well, wait, where is the bottom of this hole? How deep can it be?
Yeah.
And as this stuff is happening and he's trying to make these determinations, they're doing other experiments. Like he's yelling into the hole. And one of the things that he said about that was he never heard an echo of any kind.
Right.
It was like it dampened the sound almost. No sound came back.
Well, sound or light, that's the other thing, is that he's shown high-powered flashlights. You know, back then you could get, well, you can get 100,000 candle power. I'm not sure at the time, but now it's fairly common. You can get like 1 million candle power flashlight.
Yeah, now with LED, you can get these crazy handheld spots.
Yeah, they'll start a fire. But the idea, even in Mel's day, he said you could point these at the sky and you'd see the beam go all the way up into the night sky.
Yeah.
He would point that down into the hole. He said like it just swallowed it up. He said it would illuminate the sides of the well, which also I'll describe as, and you had to kind of piece this together, like what's around the hole. It's not just a dirt hole with nothing around it. Mel described it as having a stone retaining wall, and that went down about 15 feet or so, and then it would be dirt and rocks.
Yeah, if you looked inside. But on the outside, it was only 3.5 feet tall. Right. But when you looked inside, Silence of the Lambs style, it went down about 15 feet.
Puts lotion to the basket. Here's the deal, is that there was a lip on it. So it wasn't just, I thought it was flush at first, but no, it is kind of like a well in that sense. There is a rock retaining wall around it. So,
yes,
so you didn't basically slide in or were able to fall in. Now, if you did, that'd be the end of you. And that's the deal, is that somebody built this. If this is true, that is curious to me. Somebody took time and care to build this retaining wall around it. Again, it goes down about 15 feet. He said, basically after the dirt and rock phase, after the 15 feet, it was just stone as far as you could see. And then you couldn't see anything down there any further.
That's
right.
So
just this black abyss. And it's the trope of the bottomless pit. All of us, when we were kids, heard stories about that. Why is that such a big thing? Because of the bottomless part. It doesn't make any sense. What do you mean there's no end to this thing? What do you mean I can't hear a twink, even if it's 30 seconds later? Well, that's what's stumping Mel here. And so as he runs out of the 1,500 yards of monofilament, he then goes to the professional fisherman's shop where you can buy more advanced gear than probably your Dick's Sporting Goods. He's now buying 5,000 yard spools of 20-pound test line. And the way he described it later is that he had basically an outrigger. So that was about 1.5 feet, 2 feet long. And that was an extension over the hole so that the line is now dropping down more or less straight through the center of the hole.
Right.
And yeah, what he said later is that you could move it side to side when it got that long, but it was kind of hard under the weight of the line itself. So that's what's happening here. He's now splicing together 5,000 yard spools of line because the idea is that you go to the fisherman's store here and they're assuming that you're just filling up other smaller reels, right?
Right.
For other fishermen. Maybe you have a fishing charter and you have guests and you give them fishing poles to use. And so line gets lost or gets tangled. You have to replace that. They don't know or care what he's doing with it, but that's what he's saying is that you can get these big foot wide spools of monofilament.
Right. So he's running it down there. It's getting longer and longer. He's getting down like past 4,000 feet. He wants to find out. At this point, it's like, well, there must be water down there. Did I hit water? So he comes up with this experiment, again, based on his shark fishing skill set,
right? Where
he's going to take a roll of lifesavers and send it down. You can pass the string through the middle and send it down there. And then this is something that I thought this was interesting. He's talking about a shark fisherman's trick, and this is what they would do is he said they would put their bait on a balloon attached to a roll of lifesavers, and the bait would go out into the ocean on a tide, and this is quoting what he was saying on Coast to Coast, and eventually the lifesavers would melt and the bait would fall to the bottom. And I was thinking, this is crazy. And then I went today and I found a YouTube video and put it in the links about using a balloon to bait sharks. There's nothing about the lifesavers, but this is definitely a real technique. And it talks about that. That might have been his little hack, the lifesaver part of it. But he sent the lifesavers down because he knew that was his control for his experiment. He knew that lifesavers dissolved in water and that he would be able to determine if there was water by whether or not the lifesavers dissolved, as opposed to just sitting down a weight that might get dried off by the time it got back to the top.
Good point there. And his point was that, if you're surf fishing or you're fishing from the coast, you can't cast out far enough to get into shark range. Now,
that's right.
You have famously caught a flounder with a bit of dried apple from the shore.
Yes, I have. In the North Carolina surf. Well, it was dehydrated apple.
Okay.
And I was in the Boy Scouts at the time. And my scoutmaster said he would eat his hat if we managed to catch fish with dehydrated apples because we'd run out of bait. And sure enough, we did manage to catch flounder in the North Carolina surf with dehydrated apples. And he did attempt to take a bite out of his hat, but we let him off the hook.
Fortunately, his hat was made out of dehydrated apple.
Yeah, it's a dehydrated apple hat, but it did work. Flounder's delicious, surf flounder. And
the point, though, is that you were surf fishing. You're standing in the surf, right?
Yeah. You get a big saltwater pole, pretty long pole, and 2 or 3 weights, but they're only a few ounces. You can put 2 or 3 hooks on it and cast out past the breakers if you can.
Okay.
If it's high tide, usually the waves are breaking closer to the ocean. Let's go out just a little bit past the breakers, and they would be there.
My question is that you have to get the bait and the weight in a cast, I don't know, 30 feet, 40 feet into the surf?
Yeah. So in that case, but no sharks,
Right, so the balloon keeps the weight and the bait afloat as it takes it out to the tide to shark depth. And then by that time, the lifesavers will have melted and provide a delicious wintergreen treat to the fish. The bait drops, and now you're shark fishing. So in this case, though, he's figured if there's any reasonable moisture down there, it's going to dissolve the roll of lifesavers at some point.
Yes, and I do want to point out, because balloons are a horrible maritime hazard to not only life but boats. The YouTube video I watched today, the guy said very plainly in it that it was a biodegradable balloon that would dissolve.
Very good. Very good. Yes, unlike the crew of that one party boat that...
that's what made me think I need to really say something about this.
Yes, we should. You shouldn't do that because that's just a bunch of latex now clogging up and polluting the bay.
Yes, doing everything. It's killing animals and your boats and jet skis and whatever else. So... he's doing this. He's like, it's 5,000 feet. Is there water? There must be water at this point. And nothing is happening. Lifesavers come up bone dry, and he can't figure out what to do next other than add more line. Now, he has been talking about his wife, who supposedly worked at, he just says a local university, but Ellensburg, right in the heart of it, Central Washington University. So that's probably the school.
It's assumed that's the school
Yeah.
because what's also hinted at is that she works in the geology department.
Right.
Now, she mentions to Art, because, well, what a great lead. We need a geologist. Well,
Yes.
he said, Art says, well, what'd your wife's colleagues say when, you pressed her to press them about coming out and taking a look? Well, they scoffed. It's like,
They
come on.
scoffed. Yeah. And that's a believable reaction, actually, because
Sure.
it takes a certain kind of person, whether it's in the geology department or wherever you're going. It takes a person like the kind of person that listens to this show to go, huh? Now, regardless of your profession, this isn't about your profession. It's
Right.
about a certain disposition where you say, that sounds crazy, but you know what? Let me get some gear and let's just check it out real quick. It's easy to imagine that department is just like, yeah, whatever. Your husband's crazy. You guys don't have a bottomless pit on your land, and we've
You're
got
pulling
all
our
these
leg. Yeah.
we've got all these experiments to finish, or we've got these theses to write and whatever. So that's plausible to me that they were like, no, we're not going out there.
Mhm.
So anyway, he's still trying to figure out how to get to the bottom of it, literally. He's like, I want to get to the bottom of my hole. So he's now trying
Tick that one off the list. Yeah.
to put more monofilament onto the line and just keep lowering it down. And
Right.
as Forrest said earlier, as he's unfolding this story to Art Bell, he's talking about the dog story. And he does say, I just want to make this clear from the very beginning. He says, this might be apocryphal. He says the word apocryphal, which was almost the name of our show, which I don't think anybody would. Yeah, one of our names before Astonishing Legends was Apocrypha.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was yes. That
I
was
liked
on the,
it. That was mine.
That was on the
I
bar
don't think you
napkin
liked it
when
that
we
much.
first discussed it. But
Yes, yeah, when in the bar
we have to
napkin over there in Los
decide,
Feliz, and
the spellability factor was very low.
and also nobody would know really what that word is, which basically means made up.
Right.
In no uncertain terms. So we wound up with Astonishing Legends. But anyway, he said, well, this story might be apocryphal, but supposedly the dog went down. And then, the first time he tells the story, it's just like, and then the hunter saw the dog, like you said, running through the woods. It was the same dog, same collar. It's, and in these later appearances, there's a little more about the dog. We'll get to those later. But that's the first idea. It's not something that Mel ever said himself. So far, all he said is, this hole's deep. I can't find water in it.
Right.
I gone down about 5,000 feet, and I'm going to keep going down. So Art, whatever his disposition is, there's a couple times when he's just like, so Mel, you're not pulling my leg, right? You're telling the truth. It starts out very gentle. Right. And Mel, every time, no, I'm not pulling your leg. I'm telling you the truth. This is on my land. This is happening. And, then he starts talking about, folks know about it around here. Everybody's bringing their stuff to dump in it. And as Forrest said, he didn't mention the gentleman bringing the tires until a later interview, but he did say, I let my neighbors put stuff down in there. So,
well, that's the tradition around there. Now, here's the thing is that before you start thinking that these are all horrible people, you'll find out Mel is actually fairly ecologically minded. And he even says, I know the TV tubes are bad. And
I felt bad about the TV tubes.
Yeah, and Art's grilling him on that's like, well, I don't know if that's, you should be doing that. And just like, and another thing is that.
He's also like, I also don't know if you should say it on the radio.
Yeah, it's a little late for that.
Yeah.
But, as far as Mel's concerned, this is not a new idea. Even out here in Southern California, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, they made a deal with one of the local mine owners, and it was a very deep mine shaft out here somewhere in the Mojave, I think, and it's not being used anymore. And I think they made a deal with some of the counties to use it as a trash dump because it's essentially solid rock. It's not going to seep into anything.
Right.
And so it's used as essentially a dump, and they're just going to stuff that thing full until it's at the brim and then seal it off.
Yeah.
Now, what Mel says is that, because Art presses them on that. It's like, well, don't you think it's going to interfere with the aquifer or anything that's going on? He's like, well, we have our water tested. Ellensburg water in that area is pure and delicious. So our thinking is that this thing's going down into solid bedrock. There's no seepage. It's not sandstones. There's no aquifer issues, that people have been doing this for at least 40 years.
Yeah.
He said the gentleman that he bought the property from was about in his 80s, and it was as long as he could remember it going on, that people were doing this. So not that you should keep on doing that, but it's convenient. Look, these people are rural. It costs money to go to a dump, and you've got big stuff, and this is cheap. So they figure like, no harm, no foul.
Yeah. If you can't be like super concerned about this and then be okay with fracking, where they won't even tell you what the chemicals are that they're shooting into the earth at these same depths. So,
in a little side note here, remember we went into on site to do an event for a large automotive company, and people fly in. There was a lot of contingency from Southern California, and I remember we were in a rural town. I won't say which one it is. But we're in the production office, right? And somebody comes in, it's like, oh, I have these batteries. Where's the recycle bin? And I said, you know where you are, right? Yeah, that's Southern California. There's no recycle bin here.
right.
So either you pack them back in your bag or they go in the trash. And they were like, and so that's what you learn. It's like somebody telling you, we don't wear seatbelts around here. If you've driven around recently without a seatbelt, it feels weird. It doesn't feel right. So again, this is also 1997. So attitudes have changed, and let's just say that Mel is aware of these things, and that
even in the moment he was aware of it.
Yeah, it's not cool. He's certainly not throwing pets or cows down this thing, but he knows other people have.
Yeah,
and they all know this. Now, here's another important aspect of it. Can any neighbors who know about this be produced? Keep that in mind as we go along.
Yes,
because
definitely.
As you hear the story, this might stick going down. So anyway, please continue.
There gets to a point where, of course, it's coast to coast. So Art starts taking phone calls and people are calling in and talking to Mel. And it's just the best part of the show, hearing these folks talk. One of them calls in and volunteers to be lowered into the hole.
That is a gentleman from Austin, Texas.
Yes.
You get people listen, if any of you have listened to it, you know there's a certain type of person that calls in a certain age range, and maybe they're not NYU professors usually.
Are you
knock on them.
Assailing the listeners of Coast to Coast on Astonishing Legends?
No, what I'm saying is that there are people that think that aren't like, oh, this is what a bother. This is what a ridiculousness. I didn't have time for this. It's people who are interested in this stuff. And if you've ever watched any ghost hunting show or know ghost hunters, there is a blue collar aspect to this.
Yeah.
That is the background of my family. We're not all highfalutin. A lot of laborers and artists on my side of the family. The other side, they're doctors and lawyers. Our side is a salt of the earth type. So it's people who don't think this is ridiculous. We all share an interest in this. But it's people from all over, and they have some good ideas, and that's what they're calling in. That's why Mel contacted Art, is that like, hey, is anybody out there, any of your listeners? I know you have a huge listener base. What can we do about this?
Yeah.
Because here's the thing that, according to Mel, is really driving him with this minor obsession, is that he just wants to experiment. It's like, I got something kind of unusual here. What should I do with it?
Right.
In Mel's will, he had it that if he should pass away, he was to be thrown down the hole.
Yes. And that's something Art brought up specifically because the dog came back to life. He's like, well, if you had a fatal disease, would you want to go into the hole?
Right.
The implication being that zombie Mel would then wander the land, I guess, popping back out of the hole somewhere. I don't know. But he said, yeah, sure. If I was dead, he's like, alive? He's like, I'm not going down there. Are you crazy? But this guy from Austin called in and said, I'll go down, but I want to be in a cage and I want an instant up button.
Yeah, that didn't really help.
I want a button in my hand that's just up and I can hit it in case I see something crazy. He actually said something about, look, if it can eat the whole cage, then I'm a goner anyway. So if there is something in there.
And it didn't really help the incarcerated gentleman in the Huska Castle scenario who was brought up, white-haired, raving like a maniac, and died soon after. So usually if you take your cue from media, literature, tall tales, it's never good to go down the hole. You don't come back with superpowers. You come back in a more disadvantageous state, let's say.
Yeah.
So people are joking about that. It's like, well, I'd do it. And then as it goes on, Art says he's got a lot of requests. It's like, I'll go down. I'll test it out. In Mel's case, though, what Art says is like, you can't really just dispose of yourself or human remains into the well.
No, and I feel like at one point Mel himself is like, well, what if the rope breaks? He's like, I'm not doing this.
Right.
But I mean, we saw this on Oak Island. Those guys that came and went down that one shaft. It's so dangerous. It is so dangerous. I mean, that was water and involved scuba, but like either way, it's it's a potential bottomless pit.
That's true in that case, but also the last tragedy that befell at least the sixth person to die there, if you remember. And I think
Yeah.
the curse is that the seventh, blah, 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 this and that.
Yeah.
They were in a large pit with no water, but it was carbon monoxide, and that it wasn't being pumped out efficiently, and it's the silent killer. And unfortunately, I think a father and son passed away there.
Yeah.
And along with somebody else. And if you survive
They were trying
it,
to save each other. It's horrible.
yeah, you could. It's not good. So very dangerous. In this case, though, this is all fun and games with Coast to Coast and a hypothetical, because their listeners are still judging, like, wait, is this guy telling the truth? What's going on here? Well, so far, it's a good tale. There's nothing too outrageous about it. And before we go any further, and I forget, I will make this declaration now. Upon my natural passing, I don't want anything
Wait. You don't
that.
get to pick that. You don't get to pick that part.
Okay, once I pass away, there's two scenarios, because people often ask me, they can't wait till I've made this decision or it's been made for me. When are you passing away? Two places, either the water planet in Interstellar that you have to get to through a black hole. That's a planet with a 10,000 foot continuous wave over the entire water planet.
Yeah.
And the actor Wes is just continually bobbing up and down. So that's just a long ways away. It's a special place where I'm always in motion in a suit, just continually riding the waves on some planet that is a black hole away.
Okay.
Second scenario, Mel's Hole.
Okay.
If there's some special property, not that I want to come back to life, even as a zombie, even though that sounds tantalizing, it's just an interesting place to be. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so let me get this straight. Are you going to be, obviously in this case, if you are hoping for the possible zombie reignition, to be reanimated, I should say.
Sure.
You want to go into the hole intact.
Yeah, please don't dissect me or vivisect me.
No. I'm just saying, obviously, if you were cremated, it'd be hard to reconstitute dust.
I'll tell you what, if I have to be cremated, throw the ashes down there.
Okay, so when you die, throw your ashes into Mel's Hole. Okay, I just want to,
preferably.
Okay. Can you just say that on tape?
Preferably as a whole cadaver. And here's the deal, though.
See, that's what I was talking about. Because you might come back out of Mel's Hole as a zombie.
You know what? This is something that we're gonna save this for part 2 about the hypotheticals.
Yeah.
Because we're gonna hear about scenarios where weird stuff has happened that is indirectly connected to this hole, and it makes you wonder if you believe in any of these kind of supernatural or paranormal things at all. Is something like this possible? Are there earth forces at play here, much like electronic fog, something weird happening in that because of these depths in what I call extreme physics, or extreme geophysics in this case? Maybe there are some weird anomalies that can happen.
Right.
And in this case, though, what I would say, upon my demise, there are, out of the two options, number 2, Mel's Hole, is a lot more easy for you to achieve. Should you survive me.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. Unless you can find a rocket, that's...
right.
Okay, just to make it easier, just shoot me into a black hole.
Yeah, that's super easy. Be way easier to find a hole in the ground in Washington State, I think.
You never know. John Hurt is endlessly sailing through space from the first Alien movie, remember?
That's fiction.
Okay, so the case here, though, is that no zombies are coming up. That's just the one story of the dog returning. We have other phenomenon, but what Mel is stating here for the record so far is just that it seems very deep. So then people start calling in. Art says, look, I'm no hole expert. I don't know much about geology. Are there any listeners with some comments? And somebody calls in and says, well, he looked up, and again, I think he went to his actual set of encyclopedias, folks, the actual books, and said, well, I looked up in this is Dave from Milwaukee at 16 minutes, 30 seconds into the broadcast. And he says, well, I looked up the Marianas Trench, and it's 36,000 feet deep. And he says at that time, with current mining technology, they can only go down about 1,640 feet. So things and technology have improved since then, 1997. But at that time, he said that's as far as he could research. That was about as far as a drilled mine can go. Okay, just a few mine facts here. The deepest mine that I could find, or the article about it, in the United States is the Lucky Friday mine. That was sunk May 24th, 2016, and it was performed by Hecla Mining, and it's called the Historic Lucky Friday Mine near Mullen, Idaho. Does the name Hecla sound familiar?
Yes, it does.
Well, the heiress that stood to inherit all that is from the Mad Doctor of Spokane story.
Oh, that's why I know the name of it.
Heckla, yeah.
Yeah.
Listen to the Mad Doctor of Spokane, but that's what kind of money we're talking about here is a mining magnate dynasty of sorts. So that is their mine, and that mine's about 1.81 miles deep. And again, there might be since then a new and deeper mine in the U.S.
Right.
The deepest mine in the world is the Maponing gold mine in South Africa, and that is spelled Mponeng. And I think that was profiled.
I thought it was in China.
Yeah, there was a great segment on it, and 60 Minutes, I believe.
Yeah.
That gold mine. That is 2.5 miles deep. China did sink they're on record for another drilled hole, I believe.
Right, but that's different. These are two different things. Drilling a hole is different from like a functioning mine that human beings and gear are going in and out of.
That's true. This seems to be natural in some way. At least, I don't know. The top part seems to be pretty round. Okay, it's not like a natural crack karst like Huska. That seemed to be more of a deep hole, but a natural fissure.
Right,
and possibly bad gases are coming out of it and making people loopy, seeing all kinds of stuff.
Right.
In this case, though, doesn't seem to be any gases coming out of it. Doesn't really affect people. So if you ask Alexa, though, what's the deepest natural hole? Like, what's the deepest vertical, naturally occurring opening in the earth that we know about so far? She responded with, the deepest known open vertical volcanic conduit is Þrínúkagigur in Iceland. Boy, I hope I got that right. I'm not looking that up.
No one will know.
Icelandic is an interesting but difficult language. Thrinúkagigur in Iceland, and that is 204 meters deep or 609 feet deep. So that's the deepest known natural hole.
Right. So that's basically a 60-story building.
Yeah, exactly. So here's another theory, though, is that this hole of Mel's may be a lava tube.
Right.
Coming from, of course, there's a lot of volcanic activity. You got Mount Rainier to the west. People were thinking like, well, maybe that's what it is. Those can run, it's like a vent tube for a volcano. Well, that's one idea. We're going to explore that in part 2. But getting back to the interview here, people are kind of joking around. So somebody calls in with some facts and figures. Like I said, the Marianas Trench is 36,000 feet deep. And the deepest they could drill down with technology for mining at the time in 1997 would be 1,640 feet. So Mel, with his first spool, he's already gone 1,500 yards, I believe.
Yes.
3 feet to a yard here in the States.
Yeah, and I said feet earlier, but it was yards. You're right. I forgot about that.
So, of course, people are calling in and they're having fun discussing stuff. Now, something that Art said I thought was interesting and possibly viable about why is the government interested in this? He suggested that the government could use it to dispose of nuclear waste. And if it's solid rock, or if it's a natural hole in the solid bedrock, well, that's been done too as a safe way to dispose of it where it's not going to leach into anything else.
Yeah.
And the Hanford nuclear site is only about 45 miles away to the southeast, or 100 miles by road. So maybe they have an interest in that for the hole.
Yeah.
If it's suitable. Mel also thinks maybe this has a Native American sacred aspect to it, and perhaps this was something used for astronomical sighting, like at a certain moonrise. It had some religious or spiritual significance. We know a lot of you out there have businesses of your own, and if you do, inflation is not doing you any favors right now. It's harder to stay profitable than it has been for a long time.
Yeah, that's right. If you're looking for a way to cut costs and increase your profitability, one of the best places to start is mailing and shipping. And the best place to do that is with Stamps.com.
Yeah, using Stamps.com to mail and ship gives you access to exclusive discounts and great rates on shipping from the USPS and UPS. And it's an easy way to keep more money in your pocket. And I think people think you have to be a business or ship all the time to use it. Well, you don't. You just have to be a person who wants to save big on postage and shipping.
Look, you got your hands full with your business or personal tasks already. You want to look for ways to save time, money, and stress. And Stamps.com is the obvious solution. For more than 20 years, they've been indispensable for over 1 million businesses.
Stamps.com gives you access to all the post office and UPS shipping services you need right from your computer. And you get discounts you can't find anywhere else, like up to 30% off USPS rates And get this, 86% off UPS.
We use Stamps.com whenever we have to ship something personally, and it's an absolute piece of cake. It works with any regular computer and printer. We have sheets we just drop into the printer, and poof, we can print exactly the postage we need, when we need it, right from home in our case. It works amazingly well and takes just seconds. So no matter what business you're in or personal shipping you have to do, whether you're sending invoices or you have an Etsy shop and have to ship your products out, or even a larger business shipping out truckloads of orders from a warehouse, Stamps.com is the mailing and shipping solution for you.
On top of that, if you're selling from multiple stores, Stamps.com seamlessly works with Shopify, Amazon, Etsy, eBay, and more. You can be up and running in minutes, printing official postage for any letter, any package, anywhere you want to send it.
Start mailing and shipping with Stamps.com and keep more money in your pocket every day. Sign up now with promo code ASTONISHING for a special offer that includes a 4-week trial, plus free postage and a digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts.
Just go to Stamps.com, click the microphone at the top of the page, and enter code ASTONISHING. Cerebral is an online mental health service that offers prescription medication, counseling, and therapy for anxiety, depression, ADHD, insomnia, and more.
There's no shortage of things to be anxious about these days. Even when I'm having relatively calm moments, that anxiety will creep in, whether it's internal stuff related to work or external stuff related to the latest news. It can be a lot. In the last year, rates of anxiety and depression have doubled in the U.S.
Yeah, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, finances, crime, there's a lot going on. And even if you're trying to be proactive and talk to someone about it, it can take weeks to get a traditional therapy appointment.
And those visits can cost you up to $500 a session for a psychiatrist or $100 a session for traditional therapy. Cerebral is for folks who can't afford to spend that kind of time or money finding a mental health provider. 80% of their members see a provider within 5 days, and you can do your sessions on a laptop or a phone, so you can always find an area at home where you're most comfortable.
Cerebral is one of the few services that provides prescription medication online through a licensed provider and ships medication straight to your door so you can skip the pharmacy lines. Their treatment options are available with or without insurance.
But Cerebral is in-network for several insurers, and they're working every day to grow their partnerships. With in-network, your monthly cost is even lower. Also, 50% of Cerebral's clinicians self-identify as people of color. It's important to Cerebral to have the diversity so everyone can get the treatment they deserve.
And it works. 82% of patients report reduced anxiety, and 75% of patients who report improvement in their depression see results in 60 days.
As one of our listeners, you can get 65% off your first month of medication management and care counseling at Cerebral.com/AL.
Go to Cerebral.com/AL for 65% off your first month. That's just a total of $30 to get started. Join Cerebral today on their mission to make quality mental health care accessible and affordable for all.
That's Cerebral.com/AL.
This is Dr. Nathan Bray. Thank you for listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
Well, so we're getting a little bit further into this initial interview. Art actually asked Mel if he ever felt drawn or compelled to go to the hole, basically intimating that if you ever felt like jumping in or falling in or whatever. And Mel says, no, not at all. And in fact, the reason I put the lid on it is because it's what they call an attractive nuisance. So if folks that have swimming pools will know what an attractive nuisance is.
Where that came up again was part 2 of Terry Lovelace's, when he's reading the stories, and it's the carousel story, one of our favorites, I think.
Yes.
In that the pond there on the farmer's land is an attractive nuisance.
Here's a little bit of information on an attractive nuisance from the Cornell School of Law. Attractive nuisance is a dangerous condition on a landowner's property that may particularly attract children onto the land and pose a risk to their safety. In tort law, the attractive nuisance doctrine imposes a duty on property owners to treat trespassing children the same as an invitee, and as a result, must exercise reasonable care to eliminate potential dangers or provide adequate warning. That points to a precedent case. I don't know if that one does, or there's another site I was looking at earlier. The precedent-setting case was about a child that broke into a house that was under construction and then fell backwards through a hole that was created for stairs that weren't installed yet. And the parent sued and won, I believe.
Yeah.
So anyway, Mel's worried about this. He's worried about kids falling in the hole, at which point Art is like, and if a kid did fall in there, based on everything we know about it, you wouldn't even know about it. They would just have disappeared.
Right.
They would just be gone. like anything else that falls in the hole that's a living being, if there's no evidence of it on the surface, if the hole is truly bottomless, you would have no idea that it ever went down the hole.
That's why Mel constructed a metal lid for this thing.
Right.
So that you couldn't accidentally trip and fall into it.
Right.
And just to keep stuff out, and unless you're dumping stuff in there. So
right.
That's what's going on here. And then, people are calling in. Ken from Scottsdale talks about a Chevy falling from the sky. I can't remember that story.
Yeah, I think he's referencing another Coast to Coast episode. Because Art is that's the blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I don't know that one either.
But real Charles Fort stuff. Nuts raining from the sky, Brazil nuts. Art says he gets nuts raining on his show all the time.
Yeah.
There's that sense of humor. But what else is happening in the tone of this interview?
So it's getting down to the point here where Mel is continuously adding line and adding line and adding line. And he's added what he thinks are 18 spools of this bulk fishing line now, which is putting him down to an estimated length of up to 80,000 feet, which is a little over 15 miles. And as far as he can see, the line is still taut. Mm-hmm. The weight is not touching the bottom. 15 miles down, this would be far and away a Guinness World Record for the deepest hole on Earth, if this was true.
Yeah.
And so people are starting to try to do some math here. What is going on? All right, so it's 20-pound test. How much does that weigh? Someone calls in and says, well, how much does the line itself weigh? And I love this because when this person called in, I was having that exact question in my head at that exact moment. It was so satisfying to hear someone call in and go, well, and you and I talked about this offline before we recorded tonight. If you've ever flown a kite super high, which of course was always my goal, was to fly the kite as high as possible. I did the same thing. I would have a fishing pole. I would put a ton of line on it and use the pole to get the kite way out. And this is down at the beach where the wind's always blowing here in North Carolina. And I flew kites that were so high up, you couldn't see the kite. All you could see was the string going up into the sky. Wow. And they had just become so tiny. But what you do see is that the string, even monofilament, it has a lot of weight to it. And all that weight is going out. And eventually what you see is the line, it's very parabolic. It's going out almost flat and then curving up into the sky. And then you can't see the kite anymore.
Right.
So the same thing is happening here, folks. If you're running this line down into this well and you have 80,000 feet of fishing line, that has some weight to it. So folks are asking Mel what the weight of that is. And at this point, he's like, I don't really know. I don't know. I have not weighed the spool of line with the line on it and with it off to calculate the difference so that I could tell you how much a full roll of the monofilament weighs. If I did know that, I could then take that weight and multiply it times 17 or 18 and calculate the weight of the entire contraption, including the 1 pound weight at the end of the very first spool that's already all the way down at the bottom or at the end of the line. There is no bottom. It gets to a point near the end of this very first call. Again, Mel is like, you swear to me on all that is sacred to you that you are telling the absolute unadulterated truth. Right. And Mel says, this is my hole, and this is the truth about it.
Yes.
This is my hole. So Art is really fascinated with the hole. They've covered just about everything there is about it. They touch again on this dog that supposedly came back to life. Art loved that factor, I think. And then Mel makes the point, though, I don't know of anyone who threw the dead cows. There's been no stories of any of the dead cows coming back to life and wandering around.
Well, they're a lot harder to maybe identify in that, unless you're a rancher.
I don't know. If you're a farmer, you're a rancher, you know your cows.
It's just a cow on the loose. I mean, because the story as it gets retold over the next few years is that the dog was seen with just hunting on its own, like it was stalking an animal with another hunter or seen in town. So, it's like any good tall tale, little elements here change. Here and there. But this alone, though, this is pretty interesting. And it would be something fun to... This is something I currently would dream of having on my own property because it's just an anomaly. And I wouldn't really throw trash down it, but I'd, maybe send a payload with a little bit of scientific gear on it just to see how far down can I go. Because think about this, folks. Get in your car and at 60 miles an hour drive for 15 miles. Takes a bit.
Takes 15 minutes.
So that's what I'm saying is that if you're unspooling line at a much slower pace, and that's what Mel says later, I was like, well, I would get some kind of motorized thing to really spool this up because even just bringing that line up again, even if it's piling up, it's caught up on a root, somewhere and he just thinks that there's no bottom,
Yeah.
it's a lot to spool up.
Right.
What I'm saying is 15 miles of line is pretty far.
Right.
So it's interesting. And what I like about the story, though, is that he's a bit of a mindset like us, right?
Right.
His curiosity is really getting him to experiment with this, reaching out, asking others about it. There are some other people that I know that are, let's say, more practical. They would just keep using it as a dump and never wonder why.
That could be happening all over the world for all we know.
That's true.
All right. So that ends the first appearance of Mel on Coast to Coast. And a couple of days later, literally 2 days later, on February 24th of 1997, which is a Monday, the first call-in was a Friday, Saturday overnight. And then he calls back on Monday and has a lot more details. And a lot of things have changed for Mel at Mel's property. So Art is now, he's coming back in. It's 2 days after Mel first came on the show. He's been getting a lot of feedback from his audience. They want to know more. They're like, wait, what is going on? He actually used the word dangling. You left us dangling. What's happening? The other thing it apparently did was, if you believe any of this at all, sparked a lot of interest in Mel's property from some outside forces. He sent a new fax in to Art. Forrest, do you have that second fax?
I transcribed Art reading the fax.
Yes.
This is a second fax about this that he's got. You could say that the story takes an interesting turn here. Like I said, that it just could have gone away, another goofball, funny story that ends up on late night talk radio. But it gets a little deeper here. And what I will say again is that I look at all of our stories. There are three options. All of it's true, none of it's true, or it's a combination of both.
Right.
We don't know yet. We're piecing this together. So if you look at it, though, as none of it being true, it's like, this is pretty well done. I will give this gentleman a Hugo Award for his tall tale here. So as Scott just said, Mel comes back on the show 2 days later, and it's now February 24th, 1997, I believe. This is the second interview, and Art mentions that he talked to Mel on Friday night into Saturday morning on that last hour of the program, and now there's an update on what may be the deepest hole ever. And as Art says, this is Mel's Hole Part 2. Earlier in the day, Art and the show gets this fax, and it reads, Art, you're receiving this fax simultaneously with a fax I attempted to send you earlier today. Much has developed since the first fax. I'll try to explain as rationally as possible what has transpired since my earlier fax. Around 1 p.m., I drove to Yakima to shop at the Costco there. On my way back, I decided to stop at the property. When I got there, my access road was blocked by military personnel that were armed. I noticed that several pieces of yellow gear had entered and exited my property based on the direction of their thread. That's what Art said. I think he meant tread, though.
Yes.
It may be a misspelling.
Yeah.
I asked one of the guards, what's going on? And he said there was a plane crash on the property. I said, well, that's strange. I told him there's no smoke. I don't see any in the distance. He asked who I was, and I let him know I own the property. I then asked to talk to the officer in charge. A non-uniformed man came up to my Suburban and let me know that I won't have access to my property until the crash has been completely investigated. I mentioned the yellow gear and the lack of smoke and that they were on my property. I was told by this man that it's not necessarily my property and that it would be very easy to find a drug lab on my property. Well, I got the drift. I asked if I could leave, and he said, sure, don't come back until we contact you. I asked if he wanted a way to contact me, and he said, they know how to contact me. I said, I suppose you don't want me to talk to anybody about this. He said, nobody would believe it anyway. Well, that's about it for now. Oh, I talked to one of my neighbors earlier today, and he told me something very interesting. He said that some time ago, he was driving up to the hole at night, and thought he saw the most bizarre thing. He said he saw a beam of solid black coming out of the then uncovered hole. I said, what do you mean? He said he saw something blacker than black coming out of the hole like a searchlight reaching into the sky as far as he could see. And then Art comes back and says, well, there you have it. There actually is more. From the state of Washington, here's Mel.
Yeah, so now Mel is back on the horn, Art presumably calling him and saying, hey, I got your fax. And Art makes a big point of talking about how upset Mel was when he reached him. So this is another thing to think about if you believe any of this at all. When you get into the story of all this, and if you presume that Art is being truthful, which I think he is in terms of his interactions, when he called Mel off the air and said, hey, do you want to come back on? And they were talking off the air, and presumably based on these conversations earlier in the day, he's able to describe Mel as being very, very upset, which means if this is a hoax, that Mel was acting in a one-on-one conversation with Art Bell about how scared and nervous he was, and Art was believing that. And now, to be fair, Art loves these kind of stories and openly admitted to being taken in by the Blair Witch Project at the beginning of one of these episodes. It's funny. I was showing that to my son the other day. My wife and I were like, oh, this will be fun, like last Halloween or something. We turned it on.
Yeah.
It was streaming. It was like Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever. And we're like, isn't this cool? And we were telling him, it's real. It's found footage. It's real. And then he's like, I got to go to the bathroom, pause it. And you pause it. And then all the actors' names come up at the bottom. It's like, you idiots. Why would you have X-ray or whatever you call that stupid on the Blair Witch? Do not. And it's like pictures of them in their headshots. And it's like, you just ruined the entire movie, you stupid streaming platform. And Ro was like, I knew it immediately. My son was like,
okay, you were trying to lead him on for a little bit of Halloween fun.
That's the whole point of the film.
I
mean, it's stupid. Anyway, I'm still mad about it. They ruined it. You ruined it. Getting back to this phone call now, it's the new call. Mel and Art are talking. He's explaining how there's armed soldiers on his land. At first, he said there was just like a small barrier of some kind, but then it wound up being Jersey barriers, he explained later, for folks that, and Art wasn't familiar with what that was, but I know because I'm from the East Coast, and I think but that's just the things you see on the freeway that go up to divide lanes during construction. They have a little bit of an incline on their side because they're actually designed, my dad's a civil engineer, so I know this, they're actually designed so that if a car runs up on them, it directs it back onto the road. But they're concrete. Anytime there's a terror thing or your barrier or whatever, you put that down, and Mel was saying, they were there. You could still drive between them, but there's a couple of armed guys.
We call them K-rails down here in SoCal.
Yeah. Okay.
K-rails. Yeah. But that, and they'll use them also when there's a heavy rain and it's flooding to help divert water. They're totally useful for a lot of reasons. I've also seen this one. I can't remember if it was when I was driving through New Jersey on a show, but like they have giant machines that will lay these down like a zipper.
Yeah, and they do that every day outside of New York City because there's a lane they dedicate to the buses going in and out of the city during rush hour. Yeah. And every day they switch that lane's direction from forward to backward with one of those zipper barrier things. It's crazy.
Yes.
So coming back around to what's happening now, the military has taken over Mel's property. The military has taken over Mel's hole. So that's obviously producing problems. He can't get onto his own land. And then on top of that, they wind up threatening him. They're saying, hey, you know what? If you don't get out of here, we might find a drug lab on your property. At which point he's like, oh, no. And then Art's like, wait, you got a drug lab? And Mel is like, well, actually, and then you're like, oh, this whole story just took a turn. But here's the thing. It's not a drug lab. It's not controlled substances or narcotics. It's homeopathic remedies that he is apparently interested in, that he's been taking from Native American lore and contacts that he has who are advising him about this stuff that he's trying to grow, and he's doing something with that. That's his main business, apparently.
Yeah, and I will put a finer point on this because I know that homeopathy is a trigger word for a lot of people, like, okay, nutcase, wacko, that's all pseudo medicine, doesn't work. He never says homeopathy. What Mel says is that he's in the alternative health field. And that he has a sort of lab because, again, it's nothing illegal. He always states that. It's like, look, there's nothing you can arrest me for. None of this is illegal substances. I'm not growing anything. No wacky tobacco. This is just herbs that are natural, that are old, ancient, perhaps Native American cures that he's really interested in. And so he has some alcohol and he has some solvents to break these down. And that's what he's working with here. So he said, it's not really a lab, but yeah, there's a few chemicals, but it's certainly nothing that you would find in a meth lab, right? But that doesn't matter because, as we know, with the, let's say, authorities, they don't have to actually find anything. All they have to do is plant the idea. If you're trying to win public opinion on something, it's like, we found something on your computer. That's all they have to say. And you can take your imagination further and figure out what I'm saying here is that, how do you know They just have to
Right.
say they found it. So it's very easy for them. And it's also very easy for them to stick that on your computer without your knowledge.
Right.
So again, I'm not getting into conspiracy land here. I'm just saying that Mel is a little concerned and like, well, yeah, I know that threat is real.
Yeah, he says, I do have a lab, I do have solvents, and he goes so far as to say this is a very particular plant that the Native Americans have known about for a long time, and it actually flourishes in northern Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
I also have it here, is what he's saying. And he's working with the Native American community on developing uses for it. And he says specifically something to the effect that the Indians used it at the time, his words, not mine, to treat various illnesses with it, mostly cold and flu.
Yeah.
So just quickly, and I want to get more into this in part 2 when we get into the, more into the weeds, as it were. I did find a paper, an academic paper from the University of Nevada called The Washoe Tribe and a Simple Herbal Remedy for a Mass Murderer, and the mass murderer in this case would be the flu. How 50 million deaths may have been avoided.
Right.
A student wrote this in the summer of 2012 for the Department of Pathology, and it talks about how this may have averted a lot of the deaths from the Spanish flu, and it's a particular plant called lomatium or Lomatium, and this is apparently a plausible treatment for flu-like conditions, and I think the name for it is biscuit root. And it grows specifically in northern Nevada, and he doesn't ever say, Mel never says this is what I'm growing, but that's what I think it is personally. But he's making it clear, this isn't a narcotic, and it's not. You can read that paper. We'll have a link to that paper in our show links. That was freely available. It was not on JSTOR. And so, but he has a lab, and in this lab, he's processing this stuff. So he's essentially being blackmailed. But the other thing that's happening is now he's also starting to get interest in having the property purchased. And at which point Art is like, wait, is this your property? And he jokingly says, well, mine and the bank's. This time. There is another time when he says, later on, he goes, no, it was my wife's. And then they're talking about separating. So I do have some questions about that. But Art is like, well, it looks like they're getting you coming and going here because they're either going to blackmail you and put you in jail for having a drug lab on your property, or they're going to offer to buy it from you. And so he's talking a little bit about this, but he also seems like he wants to answer some of the questions that came up in his first appearance.
Right.
So he's gone and done a little bit of the math on the fishing line, for example. And he got like a fish scale spring, the hook that hangs down, and a little bit unscientifically, but scientifically, he came to the conclusion, based on doing some weight experiments, that with the 18 spools that he had and the 1 pound weight, that he had probably 17 or 18 pounds of weight on the line. And it's 20-pound test. So in theory, it was near its breaking point when it got to 80,000 feet. And this is another interesting thing when you think about the construction of a hoax or the construction of a true story. He has taken a specific question about how this could possibly work, and he's coming back and answering it 2 days later. He's also saying that after he went on the radio, things have escalated. The land has been taken from me. The military is there. They're threatening to put me in jail or disappear me, and or also someone's trying to buy it. So there's a lot of things that have happened, and this is just in 2 days.
He's recounting the story just for people that have not heard it. And you have to assume, as we do, not everybody listens to every episode. So we seem like we're repeating ourselves, I'm sure, to people who hear every episode. But we know that some topics don't ring with people. With Coast to Coast, I'm not available to listen at 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. sometimes, and I miss stuff. So he's just repeating. They're going over the elements of the story. But here's something that was not mentioned in the first interview. I found this to be quite interesting. A little tidbit here is that Mel retells the black beam story. Remember the beam of blacker than blackness shooting straight out of the hole. And essentially Mel's saying, yeah, I didn't see these things. These are what neighbors have told me and people that I know. And Mel, of course, talks to his neighbors. Now, they're not very close. This is a rural area. You can't see them through the kitchen window. They are, I don't know how far away the next property is, but as Scott described earlier, there is no landline there. There is a collection of outbuildings and trailers, and that's where he goes up to, again, work on his medicinal plants and herbs. And other neighbors have farms and rural property like people do. And so they're not real close.
And just quickly, I said they had no power. He did have solar. He indicated that they had solar prior to the snowstorm that destroyed a bunch of the buildings, which they had a snowstorm that where they had, he said, 24 inches in one falling. So
and they had cell phones, so they have communication. But again, it's undeveloped property of sorts, but it's his, or actually it's his wife's and the bank's. One thing he said, though, is that the neighbors do talk. They go down to the cafe like all rural people do, like they do in Enfield, Illinois, and they discuss stuff in the day. And so talk of the hole is common knowledge. People dump their crap in there. And here's something interesting, though, is that he did talk to his very elderly neighbor, as he describes him. And his neighbor told him that way back when, maybe 40 to 50 years ago, the hole didn't look exactly like it does now. The neighbor said, this elderly neighbor who's, he's probably in his 80s now, he said around the hole was a series of stone columns. And Mel had his power book with him, and he pulled up a picture of Stonehenge. And the old neighbor said, that's exactly what that thing looked like. Standing stones, looking just like that, except, though, without the top stones, like a dolmen. We've talked about this before. 2 standing stones with a table stone on the top of it. That would be, I believe, a dolmen, and the standing stones without any top stone, that's more like a megalith or a menhir, menhir. So at ancient heritage sites, you'll see both types. Often they are a burial site, like a dolmen will have a burial or a sacred spot underneath it. And other stones, they believe, like Stonehenge, could be celestial siting or ceremonial arrangements or actual burial sites themselves. That's totally fascinating to me. What he's describing is like, yeah, there used to be stones there. Maybe they fell in, and now they're in another dimension. The old gentleman did not say that. That's my imagination. I'm just saying that, he said that's exactly what it looked like. Those standing stones lining the perimeter of the hole.
Yeah, and this was the first point in the story I was like, okay.
What? That's unbelievable.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I was bought on the
those
80,000
don't
feet
happen.
of line, 15 miles deep. We threw a dead cow in there. The dog came back. A black beam of black dark light came out of it. And I was okay with all of that. Yeah. And then I was like, and it looked like Stonehenge. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute.
Now, hold on a second.
But it doesn't anymore. But it used to. It used to look like Stonehenge.
No, there may have been stones around it. We don't know. It's like, this is what we found out also with Tiwanaku.
Stones are big.
No. What I'm saying is that things change over time, right? Things come and go.
Not rocks.
At Tiwanaku, remember, they calculated that the pillars there at the one plaza were not a filled-in fence. The pillars were freestanding and had space between them. Sometime during the turn of the 1890s, when it was first explored and noted, and perhaps the 1960s, somebody filled those in with fitted stones. Why did they do that? Again, we talked about this. It's like, okay, maybe they're just thinking like this would make a better tourist attraction. It looks more attractive. It's more finished. It's ours to mess with anyway. So butt out, we're going to do this.
Yeah, but that's thousands of years. In this case now, because I read in the course of, I can't even remember where it was now, but the suggestion that Ellensburg is 150 years old.
Yeah.
And these people, if you're going to the old man who had it before, it's everybody who's been there since people have been there.
Mm-hmm.
If he remembers the columns, then it's something that happened in the past 150 years, probably. It's infinitesimal amount of chronological time compared to Tiwanaku.
No, we're not saying that they disappeared with erosion. That's not the point here, is that
or with anything, with a group of people, whatever, word would get out.
Not necessarily. Look, if it was before the guy, people do all kinds of weird stuff with their property, right? So in the late 1850s, 1860s, that's when farmers started digging up and digging into the mounds that were on their property. And they didn't care. Yeah. They want to move this dirt. Guess what? It's an ancient burial site of the mound builders people.
Yeah, right.
They didn't care. It's like, hey, I found a bunch of metal crap. You want it? Then it gets controversial. But at the time, the rules were different. They didn't care. They want to move this stuff. What I'm saying is that people do weird things with their property. If you've ever lived in a rural area and you right, okay, so then I'm not going to name names, but I've known neighbors to do why did you put that there?
Yeah.
Or why did you remove that? That looked actually kind of nice. Yeah. People have odd ideas. If it's near the hole, I could see people hey, let's shove that into the hole, into that standing stone.
Right. Okay.
Regardless of how, I was thinking when I heard this that it had some Native American value to it, that perhaps it was viewed as a sacred site, as we've known before. Anything with the land that is different is viewed with more reverence.
Yeah.
Like whether it's Pilot Mountain, which you took me by on our last little road trip. It's that's pretty interesting looking. Or Devil's Tower. I can see why people would count these things as special. And in the literal reverse of that, when you have a really deep hole, I can see why people would mark that as being significant. So who knows? Again, this is part of the legend and lore of Mel's Hole. Now, again, people are calling in and faxing in with different ideas. And some of these are actually pretty interesting. Art reads a fax from a person who thought it was pretty interesting that this person writes in, imagine two naturally occurring iron veins just happening to reach towards the Earth's surface around Menashtah, Washington. There is tremendous amount of naturally generated high voltage electricity deep in the Earth. What if the bottom of the hole on Mel's property is a naturally occurring focal point, a lot like the device that Mr. Markham built? Now, that's another story, I believe, of a... I didn't want to go down that hole, so we'll leave that to other folks. I believe he did say Mr. Markham, and it's probably another coast-to-coast story. The fax goes on to say, the Earth can have its own, in effect, time machine. Over the centuries, through various quakes and so forth, all of the soil above the portal will have fallen into the bottom and been launched into some other time. This explains the lack of echoes and the apparent depth of the hole. Tell Mel to lower a clock down there. And here's another side thing, which is kind of funny. And again, part of the humor of this story is that here's all this crap and trash being thrown in there for 150 years, and it's popping out in some other, it's coming out somewhere. It's like, who keeps littering here? It's like a black hole. Now there's theoretically white holes where celestial objects might emerge. We don't know.
Right.
Where is this stuff going? If you think it's going to some deep underground military base, then somebody is clogging up the hatch there, like in Lost. There's a hatch that's sealed and it's mysterious and it actually goes somewhere. And now somebody's very upset because in some other dimension, they're getting a bunch of dead cows and garbage.
Right. You know, earlier we were talking about mental health, and one of the things that I know for a fact helps me feel better when I'm anxious is exercise. But the truth is, we all know it can be hard to work out sometimes. You're sitting on the couch, binging Ozark, and inertia is sitting in your lap like a lead balloon.
Yeah.
But there are things you can do to make that barrier to getting going a lot easier. And one of them is to find a great way to work out at home. I've had a Peloton bike for a few years now, and it has to be one of my favorite ways to do that.
Yeah.
Anytime I get on it, one of their highly trained fitness pros is right there ready to help motivate me through a good workout.
Yeah, whether you're a regular at the gym or someone who is new or just getting into working out, Peloton's instructors don't just teach, they motivate.
I love being able to just hop on the bike and drop into one of my favorite instructors' classes. I have a few I like, but my favorite is probably Alex Toussaint. They're all so positive and encouraging, but his instruction style really connects for me and keeps me going. And he puts together kick playlists for me to work out to.
Well, Peloton has thousands of live and on-demand classes, so you can always keep it fresh. Not just the cycling, though, but strength training, yoga, and running, too. It allows you to experiment with new types of movement, judgment-free, and at a level and pace that feels good for you.
Look, if it's fun, you do it, you know? You're way more likely to stick to a workout routine that you actually enjoy. So Peloton makes every class fun. It feels like you're hanging out with your friends.
Yeah.
In fact, I get a kick out of popping into a class and seeing that other users I've ridden with before are online and in there.
I would love to see you in there. Well, Peloton fits seamlessly into your life. Whether you're looking for a 10-minute upper body stretch between Zooms or a 40-minute run before bed, it works with your schedule.
Folks, right now is the perfect time to try out Peloton. The Peloton Bike Plus is now $500 less, its best price yet, including free delivery and setup. And there are even more game-changing prices available on the original Peloton bike and Peloton tread. Visit onepeloton.com to learn more. That's one spelled out, O-N-E, peloton.com.
That's one, O-N-E, peloton.com. What on earth are you doing? What is that noise? Are you making whipped cream?
No, it's my new Theragun Elite. I think you got one too. This thing is freaking amazing.
Oh yeah, I did get one, but I haven't had a chance to set it up with. So you're digging yours, huh?
Man, I am obsessed with it, frankly. It's been a game changer for stress relief and tension for me. I don't think I realized how tight my muscles were getting just from being up in my head about something while I'm at my desk. Right now, I was just doing a routine called Move and Breathe with Julianne Hough. And
Really?
there's actually a little video with it where she talks you through it too. This routine only takes takes 5 minutes, and it just feels so good. When I was done, I could feel like that internal heat radiating from my muscles, especially in my back and neck. It's just great.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, man. I got to set mine up quickly here.
Yeah, dude, it's only going to take you like 30 seconds to pair it up to your iPhone or whatever smartphone you might have out there, folks. And for folks who don't know what this is, the Theragun is the handheld percussive therapy device that releases your deepest muscle tension using a scientifically calibrated combo of depth, speed, and power, and it's as quiet as an electric toothbrush. The Gen 4 Theragun doesn't just feel good, it gets to the source of the pain by releasing the tension, and I can tell you for sure it works.
Wow. Well, Theragun's signature percussive therapy goes 60% deeper than vibration alone. Whether you want to treat your muscle tension from working out or an injury or just the stresses of everyday life, there's no substitute for the Theragun Gen 4.
The OLED screen and design make you feel like you're holding something from the future. Just go to their site and check it out. And the Theragun app I was just talking about learns from your behaviors and suggests guided routines. I'm already using mine a few times daily.
Theragun is trusted by 250 professional sports teams like Real Madrid and elite athletes like Paul George and DeAndre Hopkins, Maria Sharapova, hundreds of thousands of customers, and now Scott, and it looks like soon to be me too.
I love this thing. Try Theragun for 30 days, starting at only $199 right now. Go to therabody.com/legends, all lowercase, and get your Gen 4 Theragun today.
That's therabody.com/legends.
All lowercase.
Yes, all lowercase, therabody.com/legends.
Hello, everyone. I'm Zach from the podcast Ghost Stories of Canada. I love Astonishing Legends so much. What do you say we get back to Scott and Forrest right now?
Here's another interesting thought that a lot of our listeners might find interesting. Mel says that he was over at the university library looking for info about the Earth's geology. And Mel mentions that he came across something that's anomalous within the Earth's crust called the Moho discontinuity. Now, we're not going to go into that now, but that's just something interesting having to do with P waves that react differently in an anomalous way through the Earth's crust between the mantle and the crust. And that's why they call it a discontinuity. It does not act as scientists would predict. So there are some strange things under the soil there, and maybe this is one of them.
Again, Mel and Art are going back and forth. They're speculating because one of the things these guys said, the military guys said, there was a plane crash. You can't go on here. It's a plane crash. And Mel's like, where's the smoke? I didn't see smoke. I don't hear anything. It's only a mile and a half away. He did indicate that it's kind of down in a dip. So from the access road, you can't lay eyes on the hole, but he also said that his neighbors had seen a, quote, parade of military vehicles going onto the land, buildings being brought in, there's helicopters. It's like...
You know what this has turned into? Close encounters.
It is, exactly.
Piggly Wiggly vans and trucks, and suddenly you've got guys in hazmat suits spraying knockout gas to pigeons.
Another caller calls in and is like, do you have a criminal record, Mel? And which is interesting because I think people are starting to they're hearing about this lab and people are a little incredulous about the lab and the native plants. And he's like, no, I don't have a criminal record. And then the guy's like, this is why we need a militia. And so then they get into this whole thing about property rights, which, granted, the government came, seized his property. But in the Pacific Northwest, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not from that region, although I understand that you might be. People take land rights very seriously.
People in rural areas, that's what their livelihood is the land. If you're an urban person, your plot of land is very small.
Yes.
It's not such a factor. You're not growing anything. You're not raising anything. And you're not accustomed to all that space. So it's a different sensibility, let's say.
Well, so here is a call. This was one that really struck a chord with me in the opposite direction of the Stonehenge comments from the neighbor. A gentleman called in named Scott from Kirkland, Washington.
I remember that.
Yes, and he had gone to school in the area, and in 1989 and 90, he actually had heard stories about a bottomless pit near Ellensburg.
From his professor, right?
Yeah, from his professor who had been at the school for a long, long time, which I thought was really fascinating. So, okay, now you've got some more coming into the story. So now you're getting back to, okay, well, if you believe any of this at all, is this a hoax? It's a chicken and the egg thing. Mel clearly knows the area. He's really lives there. There's a lot of maybe he really has property and all that. And maybe he too has heard that story and he listens to Coast and he's like, oh, I can weave this all in and it'll be amazing. Maybe. Again, keeping in mind that, as you said, he baited Art into calling
Right.
him with a fax. He didn't call him and be like, I got to tell you about this hole.
Right,
He's just
right.
like, if any of your listeners know what this is, let me know. That's like straight out of the Spycraft book. It's just like, if you know anything about this, I'm just going to walk away. Here's this fax.
Well,
you found your mark, and the mark is Art Bell. Now he's getting reeled in, and
Right.
so is his entire audience. And you're doing this just for fun because there's not a lot of money in it. And in fact, it might turn into a pain in the butt.
Well, look, you don't have to call back. Like the guy who's, I'm flying into Area 51, and the line goes dead. What happened to him? It's like, that's a great hoax, perhaps. It's a fun story you got on the air on the biggest talk show overnight in the country.
That's right.
So you got your prank jollies from that. But if you look at this case, you could fax them, and guess what? Well, sadly, you write into a show, and they don't have time to respond, or they get too many responses. I don't know what that's like at all. I have no reference for that. Not answering emails to the show. You didn't respond anyway, as we sadly can all the time. But what I'm saying is that you're taking if you got this prank, maybe Art picks up on it, maybe he doesn't. If you have some other ulterior motive, you're going to have to follow up as far as trying to scope out if this is a hoax or not. One, from listening to Mel, he does really seem like he knows the area.
Yeah.
He is really, I believe, from Central Washington. Is he from Yakima? Is he from Ellensburg? Who knows? But he does seem to me to be someone from Washington State. Or, again, it could be Oregon, could be Northern Idaho. He's from the region. He has that vibe to me.
Like you.
Yeah, I'm from there. And that's the running gag, is that I don't want people that I care about harassed by people that may call into shows like that in ours. So that's what I'm saying, is that people will do that. And folks, it's disturbing when somebody calls you on your cell phone and you have no idea how they got that number.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say. The second thing I will say is that I'm trying to get a picture of, like, who's this Mel really like then? If he's from the area, how could you find him? Was he with the military perhaps? Well, in his terminology at the beginning, when he's saying like, oh, these soldier guys showed up, people I know who are ex-military will usually incorporate some terms. When we talk to those really fun guys, remember in the Pirate Lafitte,
yes,
he was a former military, and he was like, yeah, I got out the binocs for binoculars.
Yeah.
Those terms will usually pass down. I hear it with my own dad. I come from a military family. You will hear some of those terms being passed down. I didn't really hear that with Mel, but he did say something that kind of stuck out to me. He says this quite a bit. It's like, on the property, there was a bunch of snow. It caved in some of our buildings, and I saw a lot of yellow gear.
Yeah.
And he says yellow gear quite a few times.
Yes, he does. I was wondering about that. I don't know what that means. I mean, I presumed he meant caterpillars, but I don't know.
Yes. Well, that was my assumption at first, but I thought, like, you know what? I don't hear that from my purported area a lot.
Yeah.
And I just thought, like, is that a military term then? And I looked it up, and apparently it is a Navy term. Because somebody asked that about NCIS. I heard them say, like, get that yellow gear organized on the deck or whatever. And somebody responded, like, currently there are more than 50 different types of MHE, commonly referred to as yellow gear, utilized throughout the Navy, ranging from different types of pallet jacks and forklifts to loading platforms, tractors, and cranes, and MHE standing for Material Handling Equipment.
Oh.
So then I wondered, like, okay, was Mel in the Navy? Well, I'm trying to piece together, it's like, is this somebody with a good story that is carefully seeding some bits of information and withholding others and making it seem like he doesn't know about this, or he knows a lot about this? Is this that level of deception, or is this just a genuine guy? Because when you hear him, he seems very genuine. He seems very trustworthy, down to earth. Yes, he could be writing a hoax, of course, and you just tell Art you're not. But he doesn't sound like a lot of other people. And what I will say, we've talked about this before, when we get an email of somebody with an incredible story, what we notice or just doesn't smell right is they come out of the gate with a bunch of really over-the-top outrageous stuff. And it's just the way that a lot of the emails we get, it's all outrageous, right? And you're talking about, I had a shadow person experience, or this is happening to our family, we're being haunted. But when somebody talks about something that doesn't fit the usual stories, that's a red flag to us. It's like, okay, well, what are you getting at here? And you find out, like, I want to come on the show. I want to plug my my book or my screenplay, or I'm doing this, or it's another podcast. It's like,
Right.
Okay, it just doesn't ring true. Here in this thing, it's expertly laid out in that it's bits leading up to more of a crescendo, and then it's knitted together with some head scratchers that are real. Like a caller, Scott from Kirkland, says also that guess what's nearby? The Yakima Firing Center, huge military training base where they did Desert Storm training. There are satellite dishes that aren't supposed to be there that they won't admit to. Secret stuff is going on there. They're close by. If they found out about something that's even kind of an anomaly that they can either take advantage of or is a threat to their training, they're going to want to investigate it and seize it.
That's right. Poof, you're a drug dealer.
Well, here's the thing.
Make me a banana.
Yeah, here's the thing. Mel is just saying, look, I'm being honest. I don't have anything to fear, but really there doesn't have to be anything concrete. And so what he's saying, though, is that they seem to be hitting me at both ends here because they're saying, like, you don't want to cross us. Also, we might make this worth your while. What do you think?
Yes.
He seeds something, Mel does, that's interesting. He makes one statement, says, well, you know what? If a deal is offered, I might want to get out of the country. I might like to go to Australia. And then somebody says, oh, like where Stan Dale is? And I don't know who that is. But Mel responds, yeah, someplace that is geologically sound. And they all have a laugh. So in any case, if you believe Mel in a story, he's pretty shook up now. He doesn't know what's going on. He just knows that now he may be a pawn in some bigger story.
Forrest, do you know the expression when somebody says something's a little too pat from like playing cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so for people that don't know, if you never played cards, in terms of having a pat hand, that means that everything plays. You don't have a discard. Like if you're playing a rummy game, you just put it all down on the table. You've got the perfect hand. It's pat.
Right. That's because your relatives do play bridge.
Contract Rummy. That was a game they used to play. It was so much fun.
Okay.
And so, it's a rummy game. You have to get 2 straights of 4 and a set of 3 or whatever. And if in the last hand, there'd be like 8 hands. And that last hand always had to be a pat hand, which meant you couldn't go down on the table until you were ready to go down on the table without a discard. So you had to keep drawing until you got your perfect hand. That's a pat hand. So the first thing that felt pat to me about this was when he said, gee, I'd really like to go to Australia. That would be something. And it didn't feel that way in the moment, but it felt that way in the next moment that we're about to talk to you about now. This all leads up to Mel's third appearance on Coast to Coast, and a significant amount of time passes here between that last one. So again, to look at this timeline, the first one was February 22nd, 1997. Then 2 days later, on February 24th, he calls back, or Art gets in touch with him and says, what's going on? He's like, my land's been taken over by the military. I can't get onto it. All these people start calling in, you need to form a militia. There's all kinds of conversation about how to fix the problem. He's like, I don't know. They told me that they're going to say I have a drug lab, or they're going to, there's an offer to buy it.
Right.
And then he's like, I wish I could go to Australia. Well, then he disappears, essentially, from Coast to Coast anyway. He gets back in touch with Coast to Coast in April of 2000. 3 to 4 years later, he's been gone.
So you're talking now, this is the third call in the year 2000.
That's right.
Okay.
He is now returned to the United States after several years in Australia. Art backs this up. Art says, I received communications from him that were definitely from Australia.
Yes, that's true.
In whatever way. He doesn't need to, I believe Art. He doesn't need to go into the details on that. But Art said, no, he was there. That's where the communications came from. So I do believe, if you believe any of this at all, that after Mel's hull was confiscated by the military, he made his way to Australia. And I do think he really went to Australia, even if this was a hoax. I do believe he really went to Australia.
I will agree on that point. And here's the other thing. I know it sounds, like I said, I brought up the premise that perhaps he was seeding the story. It's like, well, you don't be surprised, or sometimes I'm down under and I'm in Australia. He's preparing, he's laying out the story. But figure this, folks, this is 3 years later that he's paying off that part of the story. I want to set the mindset here just quickly, is that at the end of the last call, the second call, Art on the air says he feels kind of bad because if this is true, just talking to Mel has ruined his life in a way. He's got the feds on him. He's had to move. All this stuff has
Been
happened.
threatened with imprisonment.
Been threatened. He's freaked out, and that shouldn't happen when you call into a fun show like this. But suddenly he sparked the interest of, that's the other thing, are they listening? How did that happen?
Yeah.
Are they monitoring everything? And they're finding, I think Echelon was up and running by that point too. And did they just listen to keywords? What's going on? Somebody speculated that the HARP program, which of course people think is part of some conspiracy there, that was clandestinely used to detect holes in tunnels. Of course, your adversaries or drug lords or this and that. Is that something they found out through the HARP program? You know, there's all the speculation, but basically artists saying, like, I feel really bad. If there's anything I can do, we'll help you out. That's the last he heard from him in that second call. Now, it's from 1997 to 2000. Some years have passed, and the tone has changed. When he gets back on the phone, he sounds a little different.
Yeah.
He has the same elements of the story, but at this point,
I myself thought he was a different person, but I then realized there is a wide disparity in the quality of archived coast-to-coast stuff that you get online. Between if it's on a YouTube thing or it's in their own archives, it's just all over the place. And at first I was convinced. We have a friend who is a former law enforcement expert. I asked him to listen to it because I was just like, do you think this is the same guy? Because I feel like it. And he's like, no, I think it actually is, that there's a pitch or a tone shift or something. And then once I thought about that, I agree too, but then I caught a couple of colloquialisms that Mel used across the 3-year gap. And one of them was, I don't have it handy. And he said that again. And that's just one of those throwaway phrases, like you were talking about the military phrases, binocs or whatever. That's a throwaway phrase that it's very hard as an actor to pretend to do again if you're impersonating a person. So I debunked my own idea that the third call was coming from a different person pretending to be Mel because it sounded so different once I heard him say, I don't have it handy. And I knew that he had said that a couple of times before back in 1997. So just a little thing I'm putting out there. I mean, not that anyone can't, people are going to be like, oh, anyone can say that, but you could. But to pick out that little phrase, that little affectation, that's going to take a real skilled professional in terms of hoaxing something.
Yes. What I would say is the practicality of it, again, for what purpose other than to be in the show, is that then you have a really obsessive person who wants to imitate Mel. Now, this is something that Art
that's like
said
Bill
before.
Hader. I know people like this, by the way. That is an immense amount of talent and focus. That is not your average person that it takes to do an impersonation like that. Very rare that people can do that.
Right. So you have that running. Now, Art did say before is that, of course, he got let's say a decent 2 handfuls of a bunch of Mel impersonators calling it like, oh, Mel, I want to tell you more about the hole.
Yeah, and he did talk about that.
He did talk about it. And he said, like, look, I got this guy's phone number. Okay. So
yeah, you know what else I bet Art does off the air? I bet he's got secret passphrases with his guests once he identifies them. Because when you do, that's what I would do. We don't have a lot of callers calling in, but if we had, I would be like, okay, it's like Star Trek in the chess game, Queen to Queen's level 3 or whatever. You don't have the right answer. You're not the dude I talked to before.
Exactly.
And I'm sure that he was taking steps like that.
So when he was talking to him back in 2000, in 1997, and now we're talking about 2000, he had established a rapport, and he is certain this is the real Mel. Now, when you hear it, you could say like, wow, it's a different guy. What I will say in profiling who this Mel might be, what we heard in the 1997 thing is that he's an older gentleman. He will later say that he's pretty much retired. He still tinkers with his herbs, is keeping active that way, but he's essentially retired. But you can hear him shifting in his chair like I do now. Because as you get older, then like you get up.
He also mentions in the 2000 call that he's about to turn 68. So we actually have his age now.
As folks age, and I've heard this with my own mother, and in just a few years, her voice has changed a little. People get older. They're, let's say, a little bit more gravelly, or, so it does happen to folks as you get older. That didn't really trip any alarms for me, but I will also say, if you are faking this, that's an obsessive, freaky amount of studying to be this Mel character and keep everything in line.
Yeah.
And so when we come back, now Art's tone is different because he's a lot more jocular. He's having more fun with this. He's like, well, here you go, folks, the one and only Mel. He's like, and he starts off, as we said, with the Blair Witch thing. And what he's getting at is like, come on, man, this isn't like a really slow burn joke on
this yanked my chain. Are you yanking my chain?
Yeah.
And Mel's like, I haven't seen Blair Witch, but, I'm telling you the truth.
Right. So you could say Art maybe is a little more wary, but he's also, I think, genuinely pleased and delighted that he's back after this amount of time. So they rehash.
They're old friends. At this point.
It's that story got a lot of mileage. What he also says, Art does, is that, when can you believe all the hullabaloo that happened after you made that second appearance? Because now you have groups of people who are Mel's Holes aficionados, and they go out looking for it. Paranormal investigators and different people and TV news stories and newspaper stories. It turned into a thing, whereas most times these stories that happen on Coast to Coast AM don't really go much of anywhere. This one had a bit of a zeitgeist hook in it. So that's where we're at now. And in this interview, he's rehashing some stuff. And one thing I did want to say is that, again, he says yellow gear again a couple years later.
I'm so glad you sprang that on me. I loved learning that on the air while we were talking.
Well, I'm trying to, as I do too, I'm trying to profile this guy. Like, what is he, again,
I was wondering what that meant. I just kind of assumed it was caterpillars and, heavy equipment.
Well, no, you're right. I think that's what he means. But what I'm saying
it
is
is and it isn't, though. I
Yeah.
mean, it's different from like the thing I used to use when I worked at a grocery store in the back to move pallets around.
Yeah, the
like
pallet
that makes
jack.
more
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, because they're always yellow.
Well, that's the point, is that it's material handling equipment. So MHE's, Mel has some, like I said, either he's constructed a pretty good profile of this guy and he's sticking to it even a few years later. This thing is pretty consistent is what I'm saying. I think that's what Art is picking up on. I will also say a couple of other interesting things that stuck out to me. One is that Art asked him, it's like, look, have you talked to anybody since then? And Mel claims that he's talked to people about what the hole actually is. Of course, it's been discussed quite a bit with people he trusts, if you believe that his story is true. And he says, not the people, though, that know what it is, but, what we're speculating about, people who are knowledgeable, as much as people who speculate about crop circles, crappies, and have interesting but valid ideas and theories. Mel claims that there are people that really know what it is. And he doesn't elaborate. I'm wondering, I think it's military, if that's part of his story here. He says, look, man, telling the story innocently on the show and all this other hullabaloo happened because of that and happened up around me, and it's changed my life. They go on to tell some other stories. One thing that was interesting, again, this was confirmation for me about 3 years later, wondering if Mel had military background, because, of course, there are records. You could check him out if you had a real name. Mel says, look, I got to tell you something. I think about it there. I couldn't tell you which army they were. Now, Mel claims that he was in the Army, he says, many, many years ago, and he knows what green uniforms look like and the fatigues and so forth. Okay, so for me, it's like, okay, so he does have a military background. He said Army, not Navy, but, terms are sometimes interchanged, as sometimes within the branches of service, there are very specific terms. But he goes on to say, I got to tell you something, and I think about it here. I couldn't tell you which army they were. All he knew were that they were military uniforms. And that just also reminded me of crop circles. Remember when the military got involved with an experiment, I think it was Operation Blackbird?
Yeah.
And they were goofing around with the tapes and the data that the crop circle researchers were, with the experiment they were trying to conduct.
Yep.
And you're wondering, like, why are you goofing around with this silly stuff? Why are you wasting your time with this nonsense?
Yeah.
That's what it reminded me of here. If the military is involved, if that's true in any capacity, what's going on here? Why are you so concerned about a garbage well? Why? What's really happening? Now, of course, you could say, like, well, that's all baloney, but the neighbors certainly could chime in with this. And then you wonder, well, why aren't they? Have people tried to seek out the neighbors? Well, it's very easy to shut people up who don't have a dog in this fight, a horse in this race. They don't want to get involved with this. They saw what happened to Mel. Suddenly he's gone. What's going on here? We're not going to mess with that. You just need somebody to come by and say, like, you're not going to talk about this or we will ruin you. And that has happened so many times. It happened, if you believe that story, with Roswell. That happened with the woman who was with a group of grad students, I believe, on a geology exercise with their major university. And they claimed that they, at Roswell, there was 2 crashes. They saw the second one, or they were at the site of the second one. The Army shows up right away, and they were told to face the rock And there was a pretty nasty NCO, non-commissioned officer, who was screaming at them like, if you say anything, you have no idea what we're going to do to you. You will regret it. Face the rock, say nothing about this ever. And of course, that story was told on this woman's deathbed to her nurse. And it was the nurse who reported the story in a few documentaries. But that's what I'm saying, that you just have to threaten people like that. It's like, okay, yeah, I don't want any of that. That's fine.
Alien
I will not tell anybody until I'm on my deathbed, perhaps. Right. And again, this is just part of a interesting little twist if you are making this stuff up. And he says, I couldn't tell you if they were German. I couldn't tell you what they were. And Art asked him, it's like, well, did they have sidearms? And he said, yeah, they had weapons, fully automatic weapons. Everyone did. Another interesting tell, Mel tells Art, it's like, well, you've been to Israel. And I guess maybe he's announced that on the show. He's a listener. And he says, so then you know what it's like seeing weapons everywhere you go. Either Mel has been to Israel or he just heard Art talk about it. Again, small things I kind of remember. The other thing I was going to say, though, and then I'll turn it over to you, is that I wanted to know what this character of Mel felt that was odd about the hole, right? I mean, yeah, it's a bottomless garbage pit with magical interdimensional properties, perhaps. But what do you feel about it? And all he would say in the earlier interviews was, well, I don't know what it is. You know, I'm not saying it brings dogs back to life or black beams are shooting out of it. All I can tell you is that it just seems weirdly bottomless to me, and I don't hear anything. It's like it confounds your expectations a little. But he says, like, I don't know, maybe it is supernatural in some way. And then Art, they would have a discussion. It's like, well, what do you mean by that? It's like, oh, you mean the dog thing? It's like, yeah, I don't know. It's like, it just seems weird. It's not natural. It's more than natural. It's supernatural. Or there's something about it that's paranormal. What he says, Art asks him again. It's like, did the hole make you feel any weird way? It's a question we would ask. And Mel says, yeah, it does have an odd feeling when you're near it. And I thought this analogy was interesting because I'm not sure I felt it, but he said, have you ever been surprised by the moon? And I said, well, yeah, sure. It's like, yeah, I'm talking about you go outside, you're not really thinking about it. And then you look up like, oh, there's the moon, man. It's like, yeah, I forgot it's there in the sky, or you just weren't expecting it. It surprises you a little bit. Now, that really hasn't happened to me where I've been surprised. You forget that there's a moon, but I have gone up and in a moment really appreciated it. Like you look at like, wow, man, that's really bright tonight. Like that full moon's gorgeous. And then you can see the features on it. So I have been suddenly appreciative of it, but I didn't feel what Mel was describing. So that's the only way I could describe that feeling, is that when you're near it, it kind of caught you off guard. He says it's a very odd feeling. Like it has a presence, right? It has a gravity, like the moon does.
It makes me think of my friend Darren's children's book. He's written several children's books, but he has one called Stop Following Me, Moon. It's an excellent book. If you have kids, it is just excellent. Stop Following Me, Moon. I love it. I still read it. My son's too old, and I'm just reading.
Right.
Now we come down to the fact that he actually did go to Australia. And not only did he go to Australia, he was handsomely paid for a lease on the property, which I have questions about, because I have questions about the ownership of the property. We're going to save that for part 2. But he made millions of dollars and apparently went to Australia and rescued wombats.
Well, as the story does.
Couldn't get any stranger. So we have some more serious details about what went on while he was in Australia, and we're doing some investigating there ourselves to try to determine if anyone matching his description went there, because newsflash, Mel Waters, the name, doesn't really exist. We have done our normal amount of digging, some cursory research, as we used to say in the old days, and I was unable to find him. But I didn't look super hard because many, many dozens of people have gone before us doing this, looking for the Mel Waters and not being able to find any property owners, the last name, nothing. I looked for Melvin Waters. I looked for, and I found some people that sort of fit the bill, but they were from the 1800s. That name is an area name. Waters is an area name, but there was not a Mel Waters, but it's completely conceivable that he has a pseudonym, or that him and Art worked together to give him a pseudonym for this story.
I didn't think of that. Yeah, that could be it.
I mean, we've offered that to our own guests, some of them. So
yes, we have.
There's more details to what happened in Australia, but I guess you would think that that would be close to the end of the story. Why would we be going to a part 2 here? Well, the reality is, one of the things that Art said when Mel called back in was like, you were supposed to get in touch with me back in December, and you were a no-show. Practically called him out on the air.
Right, well,
you were a no-show.
He got Ronnied.
Yeah.
Listen to the Dolphus Ring episode for that reference way back when.
Yeah.
One thing here that I made my notes, though, is this turning point, because I'm still looking at this as a narrative legend, let's say.
Yes.
Classic AL legend. In this narrative, we're at a turning point here where something he said earlier on, a point to make, again, maybe it was setting us up, was that he immediately got a call from his realtor saying, like, there's somebody with means who wants to make a very generous offer. No fixer-upper. He was very eager to take this property off your hands. And I don't know if that's the government or somebody posing as them or, some representative, or just somebody like the weirdos who showed up to want to buy the Betsphere. Like somebody finds out, like, well, very, very big chunk of money for this.
Yes.
Who knows? But what Mel said was, like, I'm not really interested in, and I don't really want to call my realtor, but if I ever sat down with somebody who had authority, the means, he said, I might take a deal. And that's what we're at now, is that apparently a deal was offered and it was pretty lucrative. And it fits with his earlier stated wish to go possibly to Australia. This is a turning point. There's been a disappearance of sorts, a pretty major time gap, and something has come to fruition that Mel has stated earlier, and he did that. So now the question is, like, well, why are you back here? And where did you go?
And Art's like, you were rolling in money,
right?
Millions of dollars in Australia, and now you're back here, maybe not doing so well. What gives? And that's the point at which he's like, well, I have a little bit of a story to tell.
Yeah.
The reason I didn't show up in December was because I was kidnapped and left for dead with my teeth missing in a back alley in San Francisco. That's going to wrap up part 1 of our series on Mel's Hole. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our final part 2.
Please remember to support our sponsors. They help keep the show free and the lights on in Blanket Fortiana.
Hi, I'm Renee Windsor.
B-R-A-Y.
My name is Zachary Power.
R-E-N-E.
I'm Dr. Nathan Bray.
Z-Z-Z.
Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees Wendell at VW Sound and co-produced by Tess Feifel, who is also head of research and the social media manager. Special thanks to our announcer, John Bolin.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com, and our sound design and additional composing is by Ryan McCullough.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Every episode going back to September of 2020 has a transcription available on its corresponding webpage at our website. Earlier transcriptions can be made available upon request to astonishingcontact@gmail.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Instagram, Twitter, Discord, Facebook, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to additional bonus content, including the Patreon exclusive show, Astonishing Junk Drawer, which is available every week. The main show is not. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.